fashion, things to wear, possibly faces covered, but more importantly, covering up the bodies. Merch. We have that now. We are very, very excited to announce that Vampire and the Devil have partnered with our friends at Rock and Horror Apparel. They are now taking care of the actual merch, the exclusive merch for the Vampire and Devil podcast, modeled by our very sexy devil right here.
Oh, yeah.
But we have all kinds of goodies to share with you.
Got the hoodies. We got some shirts. We got some tanks coming up. We got some booty shorts. We got all the stuff you want to wear from the Vampire and Devil podcast, thanks to Rock and Horror.
Horns up. Fangs out. All right there, Fangs and Infernos, it is that time again to talk about a whole lot of movies in a short amount of time, but that's just the way that we like it. But also, this is going to be an interesting one because this is a brand new version of this segment, of which the power is going to lie entirely on you guys. Devil, of course, and I will give our breakdowns and where we kind of like things and whatnot, and what we kind of think about these things as wholes, but ultimately, this is going to be a Fangs and Infernos fatality decided on you guys. So we decided to go outside a little bit, a little further than just 3 movies apiece as we discuss franchises. And we're going to talk about a 5 spot across the board as we're going to talk about Return of the Living Dead and we're going to talk about Phantasm.
It's kind of funny though, because you were just putting up your Phantasm looks a little bare versus your Return of the Living Dead DVD.
No, man, it's very bare, as in zero, like super duper nothing. Which is one of my all-time buyer's remorses because I did have opportunities with Angus Scrim. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah, the
definitely.
only thing I got right now, I think it's somewhere probably over here, somewhere probably behind things. But I got for all you Fangs and Infernos that were born in the 1900s, I have a thing called a VHS tape, and I have the Phantasm 1 and 2 signed by the director Don Coscarelli. So I got him to sign that. So that's definitely on that when you're talking about the buyer's remorse and stuff like that. Yeah, Angus Scrimm is definitely one where I remember. I think it was only one con I've ever been to where he was, where it was just like I had a bunch of other people that I was going to, or maybe I was like either that, or maybe it was just like funds were really really low, or I remember it being the early game, so I was probably maybe just a little bit like a little bit green when it comes to doing the cons and stuff like that. But I was like, oh, oh, okay, I'll get him again and stuff like that, and then then obviously then never got the not the guy never got the chance again. So yeah, it's always like a precautionary tale that we always tell everybody. Even like I said, doesn't necessarily mean it need to be a young old guy, young
Yeah.
young people and stuff like that. Obviously have these actors either retire or stay out of the spotlight or something like that, or unfortunately pass away or stuff like that. So it's always those ones where like go and get it. I mean, I'm not telling anybody to go and you know to rob a bank or don't pay your rent or something like that to do these cons, because that's the difference of cons games now versus back in the day. Back in the day, before eBay and all that shit, cons were not nearly as cool and not nearly as like popular and stuff like that. But you used to be able to get signatures for free, and now it's with everybody selling shit, which I understand like why these celebrities are doing it, because it's like, hey man, they need to make money too. They're taking their time and to do all this kind of stuff like that. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, I just thought that was kind of funny. Showing the DVD for your Return of the Living Dead is like fully stocked with autographs, and old good old Phantasm is that, and that's another one too where like while we're talking about that, even though we're going to talk about Return first, just to mention, when you're talking about like that remorse one too, obviously a lot of people who are Fangs and Infernos are fans of Phantasm. Reggie Bannister, obviously his health has gone really bad lately. Like he's got like which is interesting because we'll talk about that when we talk about the fifth Phantasm. But he does have the health issues. He's got dementia and things like that. And I know lately him and his wife have been like selling off a lot of like merchandise and signing stuff, and making that's how they've been paying that how they've been able to pay like their doctor bills and stuff like that. So that's another one too where I think I've never been to a con where Reggie was, but there had been times where he has been at a con that I could have gone to, like like a Monster Mania or stuff like that, because they've had him before. But it's just maybe one that I couldn't get to or something like that. So he's definitely one that like is going to be hopefully he he can pull through, and maybe get that one more con and try to get him before just because it'd be kind of cool to get him on there too. But it's one of those ones where yeah, you gotta go when the goings get going, and and we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about Return of the Living Dead. We're gonna talk about the when we get into the Return of the Living Dead, because the guy had been part of one, two, and three. The one person that you're gonna have that's not on your signed on your DVD, which more than likely is never gonna get signed on your DVD. But we'll get into that craziness, and people who are fans of the Return of the Living Dead franchise probably already knows what we have. We're not breaking and spilling any tea that's newsworthy. People already, if you at least are a fan of the series, you already know about what that guy. But we'll eventually get into him. But yeah, it's gonna be fun. We're gonna talk about some brains, some more brains. Maybe a little deja vu. This has happened before. I don't
Maybe some more
know.
cops.
Yeah, bring some more cops, some more ambulances, some more paramedics, and then later on, what was it? The bring more freaking police officers or something. I don't remember what the hell the guy said, but yeah, yeah, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be. We're gonna talk about alumni people that we've talked to. There's a few people with throughout the series. Like Tom Matthews, we've did interviews with.
Yep.
Obviously John Russo, who created the series and stuff like that. We've got to talk to. So. Yeah, and then like I said, we've obviously got a lot of people that you've met throughout the series of that. So we'll talk about that. But I think those are the only two I think for the Return of the Living Dead franchise that we've gotten on the podcast before. Like I think those are the only two alumni we have.
Yeah, had Trash and Spider's appearance at our friend's The Last Toy Store been like a different weekend, I think it was literally the weekend that I got back into town from like LA and I was like spent and we've got
Yeah.
me and Linnea already. So it wasn't I always try
Yeah,
to
yeah,
make
we did have that opportunity with Linnea, but she just didn't want to do it at the con, I
yeah.
think, or something like
Mhm.
that, and we haven't worked it out. But yeah, I do remember that one. So that was
Yeah,
the
because we
possible
were also
third one we could have had.
Yeah, because we were also trying to squeeze in, and that might not even really have ended up necessarily a Return of the Living Dead interview per se, because at that time we were trying to squeeze as many Night of the Demons people into our interview as we
Yeah.
could, that particular con. But absolutely, no, for sure, my friend. But yeah, Return of the Living Dead always been a little passion project of mine. I've always been very, very fond of the series, and it's definitely a series that I would like to add a few more people just throughout the series on various movies, pretty much regardless of what people think about those movies, kind of in general. But yeah, definitely gotten my fun opportunities to fill that puppy up, which has definitely been really cool. And actually, it was Mrs. Vamp that really scored me my most recent like. Not counting John Russo, but my most recent three in Miguel, Beverly, and Jewel was because we ended up going to an MMC that we were not planning to go to just because it was falling into kind of a tricky time. We weren't really sure if like we could really swing it. It was like, I mean, there are hitters there and I do care, but do I, eh. And then boom, there's the Tobin Bell announcement. And that is a big deal franchise for Mrs. Vamp. And the opportunity to do the photo op with Tobin Bell was something that she really wanted. So I was like, well, if we're gonna go now to do the photo op with Tobin Bell, well, I'm gonna take advantage of getting autographs from Return of the Living Dead and putting Chris Jericho on my Terrifier 3 poster. So that's what I ended up doing when it came to that. But anyway, Return of the Living Dead absolutely is kind of the offshoot of the Night of the Living Dead franchise. John Russo and George Romero kind of split off a little bit on casually, conflicting ideas on where they kind of wanted to take zombies and stuff like that. I mean, from us talking with John, he's always been incredibly, spoke very highly of George, didn't have anything bad to say about him. I just think it was one of those, young people with a franchise that is or an idea that's kind of booming, kind of deciding on where to take it, where, long story short, not necessarily exactly perfect, but the idea of like, George liking, more traditional in the sense slow moving, quiet, brain eating zombies, that really work in the hordes, but move slower in the hordes versus John had a little bit more of, I'd like to say, that kind of rock and roll in him. Kind of liked the idea of like some verbiage, kind of catchphrases, the idea that they could move quicker. Um, and that's what kind of spawned Return of the Living Dead. But I mean, Return of the Living Dead is way up there as one of my all-time favorite movies. I mean, you and I had a conversation recently about, movies that we consider to be perfect movies. And while I can't give Return of the Living Dead a 10 out of 10, whether regardless of it being in my heart as a 10 out of 10, it's definitely a movie that I put up there in a very, very high level. Kind of like when we were talking about Killer Clowns from Outer Space, where there's such an epic amount of camp, but there's so much fun to this movie. Like the casting, the performances, the Easter eggs, the soundtrack. I mean, there's such amazing, old school music, 45 Grave and stuff like that that's in this movie. But it's just really, really fun. And it, also spawned so much other stuff. Like, the chemical company, Darrow Chemical Company, spawned a horror punk band of the same name, you know, and it's just a really, really cool movie. And ultimately, I think it's a really, really fun franchise. The camp and the weirdness definitely escalates on an epic level as the franchise continues. But yeah, basically an old military canister drum is discovered, and instead of and they're kind of showing it off to the young kid that now works in this morgue, and instead of just leaving things alone like they're supposed to be, they just, it's kind of the definition of fuck around and find out, as they crack the chemical and release the Kraken and ultimately release the Tar Man. Shout out to Alan Kaufman.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's like the part that I always love.
Alan Troutman.
Yeah, Troutman. Yeah, but yeah, that's the part of the movie that always made me laugh. Like, you're setting up the movie and you're doing all this kind of stuff. You're realizing that he's going into this job interview. You have the friends and the girlfriends. The punks. This isn't a costume, man. It's a way of life.
Wait, life.
It's a way of life, man. But yeah, you got all these kind of people, and they're just, they're going into it. But yeah, like the whole like, hey, remember that that George Romero movie, the Return of the Living Dead. Oh yeah, it was based on a true story, and you want to see the canisters, and then it's always like, like, oh man, that's crazy. Yeah, no, no, these things have taken a beating. Smack. Cough, 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 cough. Yeah, and then
Instantaneous.
I just love the absurdistness of this movie, especially like I said, you start off at the beginning with me, once the canister comes alive and stuff like that, you got like the half dog that keeps going. You have the dude in the freaking, in the ice freezer guy running after him and stuff like that, which I saw something about it earlier, and I didn't really I mean, I guess later on in the franchises it kind of changes, but at least in this one, it kind of made sense. Where you have the guy that you have the two yahoos that got the canister puffed, and they're right there in front, and they open up the door, and the zombie dude runs, but he runs right after the guy that's the furthest away from him. And I always just thought that was kind of interesting because it's the and I didn't think about it until someone said something. I'm like, I think he already, because of them having that canister stuff in them, and they were already tainted, and they haven't got to the point where they do get in the movie, but their brains were already tainted, and that's why he went after the fresh brain guy versus them.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I never really thought about that. I just thought it was just some weird, like, why the hell is he going after the guy that's the farthest away?
Yeah.
Kind of like stupid, like, okay, this is kind of dumb. Like maybe the actor like messed up or something like that, but they thought it was a funny take of why he went after that dude instead. But I was like, oh no, it makes sense. And then, you know, and then the gang going to to what are we gonna do for a little while we're trying to wait to party? Yeah, let's go to graves. Let's go to the graveyard. And I'm like, hell yeah, man, that's my friend. And then like, especially like I said, when this movie came out, I believe it was 1985. I think was when this movie came out. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, so seeing some of this movie, and like I said, in the 80s, they had plenty of it, but just the trash getting naked. Oh, trash is taking off her clothes again. You
Oh,
know,
that's one of my favorite lines in the movie, just because of the word again. The way that he just says it so nonchalantly, hey guys, trash is getting naked again, or whatever, just kills me every time I watch it because the fact that it's the word again.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just, I mean, and it just reminds me, like I said, not only like I said, just that imagery, like being like a young kid watching the movie and be like, oh yeah, because you see boobs, you see stuff, but it's nice that you got the full, you got the full frontal nudity that
Yeah.
throughout her performance and stuff like that and everything. But yeah, yeah, it just reminded me like later on in years when you were when you started hanging out in groups and friends and you're in high school or college and stuff like that. Yeah, there always was that one person in your group that probably was the one who got naked, whether or not it was a guy or a girl. We had guys that were in groups that definitely every time they were naked, you're like, oh, yep, there's John again with his wang out, and you're like, oh my god, I don't want to. I'm like, I've seen that dude's wang so much, I don't even notice it anymore because it's just out all the time. And that's what that always reminded me of, like that, where it's like, yeah, where you said like, oh, she's at it again. Like, okay, so apparently, yeah, she just wherever they go, whether they're hanging out at Terry, maybe they're going to to a restaurant or they're at church. She just tends to get naked everywhere she goes. So I just love the fact that yeah, she's the exhibitionist of the group and stuff like that. But yeah, I always thought found that funny. I always found like the whole like them bringing everybody back and stuff like that. I mean, obviously, my favorite out of all the people, obviously, is the Troutman, his character and stuff like that and stuff like that. I always loved that image of just him coming out and brains. And that was the cool thing about like whenever you started going into it between him, the girl who, the half body where they ask like her why she's eating the brains, all dead, feeling pain. I just love the comedy too. Like I said, like we even said earlier, the whole like paramedics come get eaten and all of a sudden you see the guy just grab the microphone, send more paramedics. I'm like, that's just comic genius because like I said, every and at this time in '85 there were a lot of zombie movies. Most of the zombie movies that were around were your George Romero ones, your Night of the Living Dead. By that time, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead had already been out. So all those three have already been out. So, your traditional zombie movie, even if you look at like Fulci's Zombie and all the zombie movies that came out, they were all just kind of brainless, and that's about the only kind of noise you got out of them were a few little. So it was really cool to just see them be able to not only use items and use things and stuff like that, but to like add vocals and talk and stuff like that. I just loved it. It's so funny.
Oh yeah, well, like yeah, when the half zombie girl is tied to the hood of the car, but they still have her spine like flailing back around like
Yeah.
a fishtail. I just thought that was like hilarious. But yeah, V&DP alumni, Tom Matthews, stars in this movie and ultimately stars in the second movie to a certain degree as well. But as a different character. But yeah, he's just trying to work the job and deal with the grind and get turned into the zombies for the F around and find out situation. And you see him changing throughout, and his like girlfriend's like trying to console him, but the zombies are all like coming in because like all that crap getting into the air. Ultimately, because one of the ways they tried to like make everything all right was, throwing one of the bodies like into the incinerator, just to end up putting all that chemical smoke up into the air, and it, leads to the acid rain or, chemical rain that resurrects just all these zombies. And then, just it's got all those traditional aspects of going into, traditional zombie movies, attacking in hordes. How long can the doors hold up? Running for your life. Can you find your friends or is it too late to save them kind of a thing. I mean, everything just kind of about the design, you know, is great. And I also love the fact that like, it's so funny too, because ultimately like you'd think that this movie, and it could have just stood on its own 2 feet as a standalone be all end all movie, where ultimately the whole point of the franchise is because every time they think they've gotten collected all of the Darrow Chemical Company canisters, another one turns up somewhere. So like that's ultimately the basis for how the franchise continued on. But this movie does did have the potential to just be, in my opinion, just an iconic, just standalone movie by the fact that it ends with a bang where they end up just calling the general who they explain the situation who he's always kind of been prepared for it, so it's kind of one of those like I got a nuke on like on speed dial kind of a thing. And the move like right as the final people are like looking like they're about to get killed by all the zombies, the movie just freezes as it just explodes in like like an atom bomb explosion, courtesy of the military.
Yeah, I mean that was a part of the movie that always made me laugh, but always be like, I don't understand
Mm.
the reasoning for it. I mean, not movie wise, but like the people within the movie wise. Okay, so yeah, obviously you have Tom's character and them character, and like I said, they take first zombie and they put him in the incinerator, and obviously like you said, it made the smoke, makes the acid rain, blah blah blah. So they know that burning zombies isn't in an incinerator
Yeah.
isn't the greatest thing because the cloud smoke turns into the thing, rain, boom, rain comes, the rain turns into the water, goes into the into the graves and wakes them up. So yeah, they already knew that to begin with. So there's two things that I always laugh about in this movie. The one, yeah, the military obviously trying to atom bomb everything and blow it up. Well, yeah, if you blow up everything and incinerates it, they already told you like this is what we did and this is what happened and this is the results of what happened. So they already knew that burning these zombies isn't the greatest thing to do because it's going to leave the smoke and the chemicals and it's going to react. So that was a bad idea. But even like James Cameron's character at the very end where he's tired and he wants to end his life because he's turning into this zombie and he takes it's a really sad scene, but I always laugh about it because he takes off the ring and puts it
Yep.
on the thing and puts himself in the incinerator and burns himself. But I'm like, you do realize that you burning yourself is going to do the same thing you just did with the other one zombie. There was only one zombie, and there was one zombie and some of the pet dogs that they burnt. That was literally only
Yeah.
what it was. So it's like you do know that what you're doing is going to probably do another chain reaction to create more of those more
Yeah.
zombies again. So
Like
it's like,
one basic body burn, give or take, like maybe one and a half bodies worth of vampire zombie corpses, resurrected an entire like cemetery's worth of zombies. And that was just like one and a half bodies, like one body and a couple of dogs. And it's like it did all that damage. So now
yeah.
your death aids to the whole like resurrecting of things. And yeah, I always found that to be pretty, pretty funny as well. Because I was like, yeah, there's the idea of like, well, we're quarantining the area. It's like, yeah, but we we kind of tried that already. It didn't go so well. And of
Yeah.
course, you can never go wrong with the iconic like tar man on the road. I
Yeah.
mean, is there, just the whatever they want to call it, a tribute to the Hulk or whatever, but it's just so great.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing about, even going into, from the first one going into the second one. And like I said, I've always liked his, Tom Matthews' girlfriend in the first movie, but
Mhm.
I've always had a softer spot for his girlfriend in the second one, mainly because, we're huge killer clowns from outer space people, and Suzanne Snyder was from that.
Yes.
So, and she does her, even when we talk about part two here in a minute, she even does her little kind of like weird squeaky like ooey thing that she even did during Killer Clowns from Outer Space. So
Mhm.
it's like, oh my god. But yeah, yeah, the whole concept of like the first one, like I said, with all the characters and stuff like that. I mean, even to Trash turning into the zombie, the naked zombie girl that's going around and killing everybody. It's so iconic because like it is weird because I don't know the concept of why it happened or how it happened, but if you look at her from not a zombie to a zombie, I don't understand how her hair got redder and
Yeah.
even more like vibrant than it was before. Like all of a sudden now as a zombie trash, her hair is even more vibrant red pinkish than it was before. So apparently turning into a zombie, it makes that. But I always love that like, where, in a movie where they give you that like foreshadowing because like even that part where she's talking about like about death, and the guy's like, I don't want to talk about death. He's like, yeah, I
Try
have,
not to
I
think
have a
about dying
dream.
too much.
Dying too much, and she's like, no, she's like, my biggest fear is just having a bunch of old men just eating at my flesh, and ultimately, what she happens to her is she has a bunch of not necessarily old men because some of them were a little bit younger, but dead guys basically fleeting on her flesh and stuff like that. So I always thought that was kind of funny. But like I said, yeah, I mean, what's not like I said, what's not to like about this movie? Not only is the cast amazing, except for the one cast member, which we'll talk about probably here in a minute. But other than like I said, that like the music in it, I love the little like you know daylight savings time little stamp that now everybody uses as memes. Like every time the date comes around, which I think it was like July something or June something or whatever like that, everybody always reposts it like, oh, it's the anniversary.
Mhm. Oh yeah, no, 100%. It's like it's that time again. But that was the one thing I always thought was a little funny too about that trash zombie turn scene is where she's talking about like, yeah, her fear, like you said, of getting like, eaten alive by these people or whatever, and it's like turning her on, which ultimately leads to the trash getting naked again scene. But then she's like having that exact scene, like you said, foreshadowed how she actually does die in this movie. But then she is like all scared and terrified and like freaking out as these people are like attacking her. And it's like, well, you were getting all hot and bothered by it before, and now you're kind of living out your fantasy, and now all of a sudden you don't like it. Like,
Yeah. I was like, that was the whole reason why you were getting naked, was because you were talking about old guys coming at you.
yeah, exactly. And now you're getting your wish, and now all of a sudden you don't like it. But that movie's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. 10 out of 10 in my heart, but in reality, still a very, very high score when it comes to that movie for sure. But when it comes to Return of the Living Dead, that brings back, like I said, V&D alumni Tom Matthews, back into this. And of course, we do love our Killer Clowns from Outer Space with Suzanne being there. And it's just kind of an interesting, very, very just similar concept that where it all just kind of initially starts off with, finding things that you shouldn't be finding and stop screwing around with them.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like I said, it's one of these ones where, again, we've probably talked about this at nauseum and stuff like that when it comes to these kind of movies. But I put this in that category too, where I don't go as far as saying that Return of the Living Dead 2 is a better sequel, but I always found this a more fun movie. I just found this movie just comically fun.
Yeah.
Mean, just I mean, because like you take the absurdity of the first movie and then add in the absurdity of this one. Like, I just love I just love the character. You have the bad kid that eventually turns into the zombie, and you keep seeing him throughout the whole entire thing. You got that, the professor guy in this movie and stuff like that that's doing stuff like, hey, that's my old golfing buddy, and like, wait, he died years ago kind of thing to this like this just the absurdities of the zombies doing stupid stuff too like what's considered probably the most iconic scene, at least in my opinion, is probably one of the most iconic scene is the random Michael Jackson coming out when getting electrocuted to that point. I just like I said I just liked the overall flow of this movie. I thought was just fun, you know what I mean? Like it was just a fun sequel. I mean, I know it's been out there that Tom, didn't really care that much for the sequel nearly as much as he did the first one. But I mean, I can kind of get it. It's basically his, another version of it. But the thing about it though that I don't understand, when it comes to, part one or part two, it is the, it comes down to where it's like, yeah, it is a little bit like cheesier when he starts turning into the zombie just because I've always liked the first one. I liked his look, especially like even though we didn't talk about it in the first one with him getting the acid in the face and his eyes
Yeah.
being gone. I thought that was just a cool iconic look that like yeah it was like that, but I love the fact yeah they're in there. Yeah, there he is on there. I can't see you, but I can smell you. I can smell your brains. I mean, even like I said, even to the extent where even in the second one, they kind of redo that with Suzanne Snyder. Like,
Yeah.
if I can have anybody, let me eat your brains. To the point where she's like, sure, and just goes, go ahead. And then she's like, ah, I'm like, what? Why the hell did you just let some dude just eat your brains? I mean, like,
Seriously, I never understood
just
that
gonna
either.
just sit there and like sit there and let your get eaten and shit like that. I'm like, it's so crazy. But yeah, I love the whole concept. Yeah, they're grave diggers in this movie, and they're trying, trying to find treasures within the dead and stuff like that. And then obviously, you know the the military, obviously the preset, the military's driving around the trucks again with the toxin, the detoxin, and all of a sudden one just gets stuck in gets happens to roll into a sewer, and dumb kids, the stupid kids, like, hey man, let's check this thing out, whatever like that, and then go back and try to fuck with it. And I'm like, well, no man, I wouldn't. Anything that has stuff like that inside of it, like a toxin thing, about bomb, like, yeah, I'm not messing with that, man. Who knows, man? It could be a nuclear bomb in there or something like that.
I know, totally. Devil, can we also take a moment to just casually make light of the still that we saw the other day when you and I were hanging, where Tubi felt the need to promote Return of the Living Dead Part 2 with what appears to be this like probably scene from the cutting room floor of this like blue
Yeah,
zombie guy that like doesn't even appear in the movie, but Tubi's using it as like the promotional shot for Return of the Living Dead Part 2.
yeah, yeah. I remember that. We were like flopping through stuff, and we were like, "Who? That guy wasn't in that." I mean, there was guys who looked like him, sort of,
Yeah.
throughout the movie, but there was never definitely a very bluish dude in this movie. But yeah, I love
Just
the fact that yeah,
just sitting chilling.
yeah, I love the fact that yeah, they did to that to they even kind of they it's it's kind of like when Evil Dead 1 and Evil Dead 2, where it's like the similar, but then it's not. This one's a little bit not as much, but I love the fact that they bring in some of that stuff. Like you had the half girl in the first one. Now all of a sudden you have the head that's in the thing, and in the a little basket thingy, little bag that he's got and stuff like that, to the point where it's even biting his finger, and he's like, ah, what the hell, like, why are you trying to do it? Where are brains? Give me his brains.
And
Yeah, it's
this
a
finger will not do.
yeah, to the point where it's like, yeah, it's even like even like the military people coming in and all of these stuff. That's the second one. Like I said, to me, it's just it's just over the top stupid when it comes to that. But it's that good stupid. You know what I mean? It's just like one of those ones where it's like. every time I watch it, it's funny. You know what I mean? My only really beef on part two. I thought they did Tarman pretty bad. Even I thought Tarman looks kind of he doesn't look as bad as some later ones that
Oh,
Tarman kind of gets sort of, but yeah, I was like, it's such an iconic look. I guess they didn't want that similar, same like skinny, slimy, Tar Man from the first movie. But yeah, that. But I mean, I've always, like I said, I've always liked the main little boy villain. He kind of reminds me of like, somebody from like Pet Cemetery or something like that, where
mhm.
he's just like this evil freaking, kid that you just like don't you're just like, man, this kid is freaking pissing me off the whole entire time, man. You're just like, man, you can't wait for him to go. And then even to like when they're in the DJ booth, man, shooting the dude in half, and he's like trying to get his body bottom half to try to move over to where his other half is, and it's like going the opposite way. You're just like, oh my god, this is so stupid but so great.
I know, totally. And ultimately too, when it comes to like the end of the movie, like, with the whole like, military like opening fire on these like humans who haven't been turned yet. So they like are fleeing to the electrical plant. And then it's just a whole bunch of just like shock electrocution to like close out the movie in like this like really, really weird way where it's like, turning on the power to like electrocute a bunch of zombies like in bulk. And then, Billy and Jesse like fighting and Billy gets pushes you know Jesse pushes Billy into a transformer and just like electrocutes him, and it's just kind of like, oh, just to kind of ultimately have people just kind of led away by like the military and stuff. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I guess it works. I mean, it didn't entirely end with fiery evaporating more zombies to like potentially spread the disease, so it like it's a little less contradicting. Yeah, you're definitely right. There's so much fun to Return to Living Dead Part 2. I still need my Return to Living Dead Part 1 as like my number one. But like the
Oh
second one
yeah.
is definitely it's definitely a lot of fun, and there's a lot that can be put to that argument. And now we talk ultimately about, the rock and punkiness of Return of the Living Dead, especially when it comes to the first movie. We get a little bit of that in the second movie, and I mean, sorry, in the third movie. And ultimately, what I actually really like about the third movie, I personally have always been very fond of Return of the Living Dead Part 3. Like, I like it a lot. And it kind of is like, it's kind of like how I've always talked to Fangs and Infernos about my love affair of Hellraiser. So, like, I love Hellraiser as a franchise. It's always been one of my very favorite franchises, but I'll never go so far as to say that there weren't serious issues as they were trying to just squeeze more blood from that stone. But the one thing I will always die on the hill for is how great I think the first three Hellraisers are. Especially me personally, especially the third one. I think Hell on Earth is epically awesome. Do I think that the Cenobites get a little bit Cenobites from Wish-ish? Yes, they absolutely do. They lack a little bit of like the awesome that the first two had. But ultimately, I love the characters, the style, the story, the arc, blah blah blah, yada yada yada. So I love the first three Hellraisers, and then I can still enjoy, but still aggressively need to discuss the follow-up movies. Very, very similar to Return of the Living Dead. I love the first three movies. Like I can watch parts one, two, and three anytime I want on loop for no real reason. I can just be channel surfing, even if I watched it 2 days ago and be like, oh, there's that movie again. Click, let's go. Remote down. But anyway, I love the simplicity of this particular story. Now, it's not that the first two stories weren't simple, they were very simple. Chemical found, mistakes being made, infection spreads, military intervening. Um, but this one is so focused dominantly on the love story of, you know, boy boy meets girl, boy falls for girl, girl falls for boy. Parents don't agree. They want to escape. Um, Mistake technically being made by girl. Let's put that
Yeah.
out on Front Street. This never would have happened if she could keep her hands to herself. Um, but car accident, and he resurrects her with some of the chemical, and ultimately she is turning into one of the zombies that we know the Return of the Living Dead to be made off of. But I've always loved the overall simplicity of this movie, very and a movie that we've talked about multiple times as well in Deadly Friend, where it's something just as simple as the desperation of a boyfriend not wanting to lose their loved one, like by just a freak accident or by somebody else's hands, and not understanding that, for lack of a better term, you can't play God.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, yeah. So I definitely agree. Like when it comes to it, yeah, the first three are the ones that, yeah, I was like, even though this one definitely has its moments and it's definitely not 100% at par as good as the first two, as far
Yeah.
as like the that. But I mean, but I've always still loved it. But yeah, I definitely agree with you that yeah, if she could have kept her, hands and out of his pants for 5 minutes. Wait till you, especially like, I mean, hey, I'm all for, when you're in a car getting some road head or something like that. I'm all for, doing little funs and games while you're that. But on a motorcycle,
Yeah.
little less handsy, little less that. Wait till you get to your hotel or get to your final destination, and yeah, she takes a header to the pole, and breaks her neck. But yeah, I mean, to me, and like I said, we talked about this off air, and I'm gonna probably put a. But well, obviously, we're gonna talk about, when we do this, we're gonna have, the Fangs and Infernos vote for their choice for the Return of the Living Dead versus Phantasm, and that's gonna be the poll. But the
You're,
Devil's gonna
you're
put
gonna
out
get your
another
crack at the devil's
poll.
pole twice.
Yeah, you're gonna get two polls, and this one's probably gonna come out first and stuff like that before we do that. But yeah, it's a controversial take. I'm kind of interested to see which way it goes. But for me, I've said it now. I'll say it till I'm no longer able to say it again. That, don't get me wrong, trash was definitely, as far as zombie, this Return of the Living Dead was definitely my first, like, oh my God, she's smoking hot, she's dancing, she's naked, hell yeah, she's hot. Definitely say she's the first, Then, your second one, you didn't have anything like that. Third one, you got Melinda Clark in there. All of a sudden, she starts, not only she's not smoking hot to begin with before she, transitions. I mean, she's a beautiful woman, just as a regular person. But yeah, to me, when she turns into the zombie, and she's putting all the piercings and all the nails and all, like, that kind of like industrial, like, like movies like Strange Land and stuff. Yeah, when she starts doing all that stuff, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm a punk guy. I like punk somewhat. Everybody knows that I'm not a huge fan of punk, even horror punk. I'm not a big horror punk fan. I think a lot of them are just like comical when it comes to their singing and stuff like that. But I like the concept of horror punk because obviously I'm a horror movie person. But punk has never really been a huge fan. I'm not, the genre of music that I completely like. There are bands that I do like, but in general, the whole punk scene in general. But I've always been more of an industrial metal kind of guy. So for me, like I said, the controversial take is that I will put Melinda Clark, Return of the Living Dead 3 zombie look and zombie look slash normal look over Linnea Quigley's trash character any day. I mean, like I said, don't get me wrong. I love Linnea Quigley. She's awesome. I love her. Yeah, I love trash and stuff like that. I have the trash Funko Pop. I mean, they haven't. That's what Funko Pop needs to do. Funko
Oh
needs to make a
man.
Melinda Clark Return of the Living Dead 3 Funko Pop. I'll probably buy like 100 of them and just have them all over.
Oh,
But that's
seriously, me
beside the
too.
point. But yeah, that's the hot take, and that's the thing I'm gonna probably put out there for the Devil's Poll Part Two. I'm gonna see what the Fangs and Infernos, if they stick to the trash, trash normal slash zombie, and then the Clark's character slash zombie. But for me, like I said, I mean, even though you don't get to see as much of her, that's probably my only gripe in this movie is you don't get to see her fully naked, where you get to see Linnea's Quigley character fully naked, and you get to see front and ass and those legs. So I mean, I would definitely put that part the better bonus. But yeah, Melinda Clark, even though you don't get to see as much, I love that aesthetic. The more industrial kind of like more S&M kind of like crazy shit to me. So that's my hot take for that. So yeah, we'll like I said, we're gonna pop that poll. We're gonna see what everybody else thinks. But I don't know, man. Like I said, especially I'm gonna kind of lean this towards. I don't know. I mean, I think I'm gonna let anybody vote, but I think if you're 35 to 55, that should be the demographic of who only gets to vote for this because you would have been, you know, you know, a young teenager or a young kid when the first Return of the Living Dead came out, and then by the time 3 came out, you were more of a teenager, an older teenager. So yeah, I'm kind of curious on what everybody thinks about that. But yeah, for me personally, I've always been that look is probably one of my favorite looks of any kind of horror genre, kind of like girl badass looking kind of thing. I just thought it was just a cool idea and concept where yeah, she's just putting all these pins in her to kind of numb the pain, to try to numb her feet, wanting to feed because she doesn't want to eat her, her boyfriend or, any of the other people around, even though in the movie she does. And that's the thing about this movie that they changed in this one where,
Yeah.
yeah, you can bite somebody and turn them into a zombie. It's not just which would have been an interesting concept in the first two, especially when keep on bringing all those paramedics in. So now those paramedics are all zombies, and there's the more zombies. But yeah, I love that concept. It's more of the bite and sort of it's going back to more of the traditional kind of zombie
Yeah.
movies.
Definitely. 100% devil. But it's also kind of interesting on that, you know, on that tangent too, that we can touch base on as well, is kind of that interesting thing because we've already talked about a little bit about, the whole love and lust with, Linnea introducing this franchise and Melinda with her own spin on it based on, of course, writing and design and whatnot. Throwing it back to kind of how it all got started again with John Russo and George Romero giving us Night of the Living Dead, where bites were really all that was necessary. But there's a very semi-curious, you know, contradiction in this movie when it comes to fluids, you know, changing, being exchanged, but only working in certain ways, where now a bite and saliva on your skin or into your bloodstream that way gets you, but you can just get down with the get down, making out and all that kind of stuff and not change that way. And it's like, well, I mean, I guess. I mean, for the concept of the love interest in the story, like I get it. At least the
Yeah,
way that my brain works, like I get it. But at the same time, it's like, you kind of can't help when you really do think about it. Because well, the first few times when I was much younger and saw Return of the Living Dead, that never even clicked in my brain. But then, over recent years, I remember noticing that, and then definitely noticed it the other day. But I was like, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I mean, I guess. And I
yeah,
mean,
that's what I say. He definitely should have turned into a zombie. I mean, like I said, the best way to explain, I mean, even though in that movie they're not really zombie, they're infected, but in this movie it's more of about infection and stuff like that too. Would be like 28 days later, where like the
mhm.
crow drops a bit of blood that was tainted
Oh,
blood into the guy's eye, turns him into it. Where yeah, you would think that yeah, this girl has this disease, she's biting into it, that biting that flesh, the saliva and all that kind of is what's turning you into the zombie. But yet you can have unprotected sex and making out with her, and that doesn't count. So I'm like, it wasn't until, obviously, spoiler, no spoiler, to the end of the movie where he finally does get bit, and the dad's trying to help him, like, oh no, man, like, no, leave her alone, Dad. I can't. I'm like, yeah, you can. Come on, son. She's dead. You're alive. Come with me. Come with me. And he's like, no, I really can't. And shows that, he had been bit, which, ultimately he was going to turn into one of them anyway. So again, the, we've talked about it with part one, and part two is different because they decided to not go the Burnham route. It was the electrocutional route, and the electrocutional route apparently works. Yeah, the three try to, the girl burns, they go and incinerate themselves too, and I'm like, yeah, you just, all you are is there's gonna be some smoke, so shit's gonna come out. But yeah, I mean, I love the, I just love the whole concept. A lot of the stuff was just very like homages to other stuff, even though it wasn't a hardcore look. It just reminded me of stuff. Like, I mean, between both characters, I think it was Ratman, I think was his name, the guy that was in it, and
Yeah.
even, yeah, even like with him when he helped him out and stuff like that, he's in those things.
Riverman.
Riverman, that's what his name, Riverman. But yeah, his character. But even like the guy in the beginning when they were first doing the test of the shooting him with like the nitrogen or whatever, like to freeze him and stuff like that. He kind of had like a little bit of, didn't not the military, but he kind of reminded me of Bub a little bit from Day of the Dead, where he kind of
Okay.
had that feel to it. So it's like, so it just kind of reminded me a little bit of that. But I love what it's like. Yeah, they're like, oh my, yeah, even in that scene, they're like, oh my God, let me out, let me out. And he's like, no, man, fucking hit that button, man. Screw those guys. Those guys are all dead. Especially like I said, in this version of the Return of the Living Dead, a bite is gonna turn them into another one. So it's like, yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, I just love all the stuff. It's like the, the funniness of, like, he stole his dad's key card and he's like
Yeah.
going in, but like trying to be secret, and he can go in and go out, and he didn't, no one really noticed it until like the second time whenever he comes back in to, obviously to bring back Julie back. But the first time, like, no one noticed it. Like, I don't know where where this building or where this technology or where they're, or what military group they have, but most super advanced military compounds or whatever you want to call that, when you use a key card, man, the system knows which key card it is and where it is, and it's like, how they all of a sudden, like, officer, blah 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 is using, here at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning checking out this place. I always laughed about that because I was like, that scene was always like, yeah, I mean, even to the point where they're like, the guys, like the guards, like heard something and goes up and doesn't see them, and it's always like, wait, how did nobody notice that? Like, to me, even like, even though I know it's the sound, they have the buildings that are in town, you would even think that them walking above them in those kind of like metal crates, you would hear like the tiptoeing of them walking
Right.
around, be like, what the hell is this kind of shit? But yeah, I just love that. I just love, between that and just like the absurdness and the stupidness, like her going after the Mexican gang, and she pulls the one dude's head, and he's a zombie with this big long freaking head and going around.
Yeah,
That's yeah, I just love like the like I said, when they just go to like the extreme of the stupidness of how like these zombies go into it, where it's like, even when the canisters start getting open and the old school zombies come out, you're like, these guys are really fucked up and messed up versus what you were so used to seeing as a tar man. These guys are
yeah.
all jacked up, so it's like, where, what were these guys? What canisters were these guys in?
For sure. And it's crazy too because but it's also kind of cool too because like you said there's so many like small nods to the previous movies because even the ultimate ending of the movie, with them, you know, you know, incinerating themselves is kind of a throwback to the mortician, not the mortician, but the head of the morgue facility guy when he put himself in the incinerator
Yeah,
with the wedding ring left out on the hook. Like it's that ode to love kind of thing. So they all kind of tie in a little bit on this one. And one of the things that always made me like kind of sad about this movie is I like it so much, and it's like again, it's different times, it's budget, it's this, it's that, it's release, it's all that kind of stuff, but it's kind of crazy because like the numbers on this movie are so tragic. Like this movie still, it's like it made something like only like 5%, and I'm not that kind of numbers guy, so I'm sure I'm wrong. And but anyway, the gap is the point. This movie only made back something like 5% of its budget. Like 5-10% of like its budget. Like made 50 grand on a $2 million budget. And I'm just like, oh God, that sucks. Um,
Yeah, which
but it,
kind of makes sense because how the this movie didn't make that much, and then you go from three to four. There's such a huge, long period of gap between those two films as far as years wise. It was just like like ah man, this franchise. Like I said, as much and like I said, as I never understood. I think it was just because the fact that the three didn't really get the push that it did. I think it got more of like now more of like a cult following movie, but because of like way the movies are now and stuff like that, streaming and doing all that kind of stuff, it's not making the money that it would have gotten. But yeah, I never quite understood why like I said, why the third one, because obviously the first one made its money, the second one made close to its money or around that or at least around enough where they can where they could justify making that third one, and then obviously the third one drops. But yeah, I never understood why the third one dropped as much as it did, because like I said, it's still, I mean, even though it is a completely different scenario and a completely different movie from the first two, but still has that same kind of like drive towards it. But yeah, it's just crazy to see like the amount of money that made. But then going into four
ugh,
and five, it's one of those ones where like
it's a
yeah, I mean
masterpiece.
I get it. Like I get it, and it kind of makes sense when you think about it, because whenever I think about it, I'm like, okay, they made a third one all those years later that it didn't do it. Let's see if we can kind of see if that that spark for Return of the Living Dead is still out. So I understand why they made four. And normally I would say, why the hell would you make four? And it sucks so freaking bad. Why would you make a fifth one? But in all honesty, I've heard that they filmed both of them kind of like right back to back, basically. So it was sort of
Yeah.
like they already were like, well, if this one sucks, we don't even care because we're just gonna do the fifth one anyway. So
We've
we're already
already
planning on it.
paid them.
Yeah, we already got that, which is crazy, and it's like when we go into this, go now that we're going into part four, the part that I do find funny about it is like it the franchise apparently has gotten what would be deemed quote unquote so bad that you had to go to a third world country to continue on with the series, that like
They
you basically you shot it in like Bulgaria or some shit.
they shot it in my homeland, dude. They went to Romania.
Yeah, Romania, that's where it was. Yeah, I went to Romania to the point where even though that it's in Romania, because in the very beginning it's definitely that, but then in the movie when they're like college kids, it's supposed to be America apparently, but everybody like all the main actors kind of don't, but most of the background actors all have a very thick Romanian accent. So it's just like, yeah, how many people do you have in Inglewood, California or something like that going, "Hey, I like to break you." Yeah, yeah. Americans don't talk like that.
No. And so it's funny with this one, Devil. So like, yeah, I remember when this movie came out, and I don't remember if I saw it. I saw it pretty quick. Again, I'm just being a fan of the franchise. I was going to come running regardless. But I don't remember if it got a limited theatrical release and I saw it in the theaters, which I do think I did. I think I actually did see it in the theater. Or I was just because it was still early-ish in internet land to where I might have just been stalking out its release on DVD. And got it as soon as it came out. The thing about this movie is it's so unapologetically trying to capitalize on Resident Evil. And that was something that always drove me kind of crazy about this movie. Now, both of these movies are ultimately panned heavily on like things like IMDb and whatnot. I will say though, I like Rave to the Grave, which we get into at the fifth one, way more than I like part four. Because at least with Rave to the Grave, and again, the acting is subpar, the story's okay enough, but at least Rave to the Grave got back to the basic camp feel of the original movies. At least the first two for sure. Um, because the third one is campy, but you can see that they're still making an effort to make a serious zombie movie in that with this conflicted lovers scenario gone wrong. Like kind of it's almost kind of like a zombies, Romeo and Juliet. But so it I like Rave to the Grave on a higher level than I like Four, because at least I think it really gives you that fun, flirty feel that the first two Return of the Living Deads definitely get you. The one thing I will say about both of the movies is the soundtracks are great, four and five. I'm definitely down for that. But ultimately, like getting back to four, I remember really liking it when I saw it and then just realizing it just doesn't age well. And yeah, I remember leaving either the theater or turning it off. Point is, I remember seeing it for the first time and being like, that was kind of cool. That big, gnarly, battle warrior guy was pretty sick. And, you know, the second tier, chick with the giant buzzsaw arm and whatever was pretty rad. Like, I was like, okay, I get it because the fact of the matter is the movies are all very military based. You can't argue that point. They're all based off military concepts. So the idea of turning the chemical ultimately into a weapon, you kind of felt like that was coming. Like you might not have sat there and like if you and I were talking back in like whatever 1998 or whatever about these movies and being like, well, if they're gonna end up doing another one, I bet they're probably gonna go like nuclear weapon, military weapon. I'm not saying that people necessarily sat down and predicted it like that, but when you watch the movie and see that that's the route they went, what I mean is I feel like nobody could really be shocked that they went that route. I just find this movie to be very cash grabby as kind of like it's like the little growth. It's the Belial from Basket Case of Resident Evil, where they're trying to take advantage of like high tech, you know, make everybody fear the country or we'll release the monster on you kind of a thing. And I mean, I still ultimately don't think it's a bad movie, but considering it is a drastic drop off from the campy fun of the previous three, and then really trying to put the subtext of part one, two, and three on the forefront. And like I said, the fact that I think it hits too close to it encroaches too much on a previous franchise. I just think it, like I said, I just don't think it ages well. Did it ruin my day when I revisited it and rewatched it? No, not at all. I still got my jollies and I got my chuckles out of it and I remembered certain things. Yeah. But ultimately it it just doesn't age well. It's just not good.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was one of those when you're talking about the cash cab grab. Yeah, I mean, to me, it is very definitely Resident Evil, but even one that kind of surprised. I mean, I probably thought about it, but that you didn't say it. Very definitely very Hellraiser-ish. You know what I mean? Like
Totally.
taking that part and stuff. Yeah, and plus, especially the cash grabbing of like those later Hellraiser movies where you don't even have Pinhead anymore. He's not even a character. You're just subplotting it, and that's how I felt with these ones. It was just like okay, we're just going to take the subplot of these, the trioxin, barrels and stuff like that and use that again and, making into these zombies. Like I said, the military part of it, I do definitely understand about it because technically, I mean, other than the first two, it made, the third one definitely heavily in the military and the fourth and five definitely heavily in the military. But I mean, you get even those first two that don't really delve in the military, those are still very military-ish movies because even in the beginning, like I said, that guy's waiting for the call. In the beginning, he's like, have we found any of the barrels yet? It's been 30, 40 years. So the military has always still been a part of the franchise. It just wasn't, they weren't really, those first two movies, they weren't really pushed into the forefront until the shit hit the fan, and then the
Right.
military kind of comes. Where like the military in this one, but yeah, to me, I mean, first off, I can almost for 100%, maybe I'm gonna say 99.9% say you did not see this in the theater. I'm pretty sure both of these were straight to DVDs.
You're
If it
probably
wasn't a
right.
theater, I feel bad for any theater that paid money to put this in the theater because they probably had one person show up a month to go see this movie or whatever like that. To me, yeah, I will. I definitely agree with you that Rave to the Grave is definitely the better of the two. That's not
Yeah.
saying very much. I mean,
Nope.
that's like saying which turd you like better. Okay, this turd. They're both pieces of shit. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's
Which
like, yeah,
which
okay, this
one hurt?
one.
Which one hurt less coming out?
Yeah. It's like it's whatever. Like or who's your favorite, this person or that, bad guy or something like that. Yeah, it's something, to like that, like, like which cult leader do you least despise the most or something like that. So it's definitely one of those ones where, yeah,
Yeah,
both, but
it didn't, Devil. I looked it up on the fly. Necropolis did not get a theatrical
yeah,
release.
as I said, I'm pretty sure that like neither one of those two movies remotely ever got a thing. If it
Oh,
did, it was probably,
no, that explains it. It was released on the Sci-Fi Network as a TV movie.
okay,
That's
that would make more sense.
that's how I saw it because I knew I felt I saw it in like a relaxed setting, even outside of DVD, and couldn't put my finger on it.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah,
Thank,
to
thank you,
me, like
Google.
even when it comes to like the first, the whatever the fuck is it that necropolis, yeah, necropolis.
Necropolis.
Yeah, to me, like I never liked it. I hated it the first time I saw it. I was kind of neglected to. I'm like, okay, I'm like, it's been X amount of years since one, two, and three. I liked three. Three definitely had that drop off, but I still enjoy it. So yeah, I'll watch it. And then when I watched this, I was like, is this like a student film that some idiot made? Like I mean, not saying. I mean, I'm not saying that even the acting in three. I'm not even saying the acting in one and two were, Shakespearean.
Yeah,
These guys were winning any. These guys aren't winning any Oscars for the. Tom Matthews and Tom James Karen and all those guys are not winning any Oscars for Return of the Living Dead 3. But at least you can tell that they're, you know, somewhat professional actors where it looked like these movies they just basically just took like what would be like some social media people that were like, oh yeah, they're kind of big, okay, yeah, we're gonna put you in a movie, and you're like, oh my god, I'm so horrible at acting, but I'll show you my boobs, or I'll give
right.
you give you a hand job after every cut or something, something like that. Yeah, it's just so bad. The only person that I actually in both, because he's a character in both these movies, the only actor that you kind of despise him because he's a piece of shit, but I liked him was the dad, the military guy. I thought I liked him. I liked him throughout the movie, especially when it was like, who's the guy that's coming? He's like, me. He starts wailing people out and stuff like that. So, yeah, I liked him. I liked his character and I liked him as an actor. I thought his acting was somewhat all right. But yeah, like, yeah, I mean, like I said, but I think the only reason why I probably like Rave to the Grave a little bit better because I kind of like the concept of making what would be this this turmoil, this
Party
disease,
party
this
drug.
thing, make it into a party drug and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I thought that was a kind of cool, interesting concept. I'm like, that's kind of neat. And like you said, I mean, I think the only good thing about both of these movies is their soundtrack, which
Yeah.
we still need to find out, and I want to see if there's some reason why. But the very Heavenly Power Man 5000, I think there's like three or four songs
Yeah.
on each movie, and they're not your typical Power Man, main hit ones. Even though the first one did have um um what's it, the Monster Party or whatever. I can't now I can't remember the name of the damn song that it's in the first one and the part four. But yeah,
Oh,
that's like
yeah.
the now you made me draw a blank again. But anyway, yeah, that song was the only now it was the only song that was the actual like bigger kind of hit version, where the other songs were definitely very, you know, you had to be a Power Man 5000 fan to know. But yeah, it's kind of interesting, yeah, because it's like all of a sudden I'm like watching the movie and I'm like, is that Power Man? Oh
Well,
shit,
yeah,
that's Power Man
it's
again.
because it's got the way it is, and it's got heroes and villains, and then ultimately it's got the last night on Earth.
Yeah. So yeah, but it's interesting. I want to kind of find out whether or not like, because Spider has been, produced in movies. Obviously he's done a couple little acting jobs, but then I wonder if he had something to do with it, or they were just like, or the guys were just like, hey man, we're huge Power Man 5000 people. Can we get some songs? And they're like, but we have no budget, so I can't do Worlds Collide. We can't do any of the big, huge hit songs because that basically is gonna oversee our budget because we got maybe $5 to make this movie, and those songs are gonna cost us more than $5 right there. So
Yeah.
we're kind of
So
screwed. But yeah, but I kind of feel like yeah. But I mean, that's probably the only really good deeming quality, and I do like the
you put a poster in the background.
yeah, I do like the motorcycling in the movie with in the rave to the grave. I thought that was kind of interesting. I think it's
Mhm.
funny that the guy's bicycle number, I don't know whether or not that's a an Easter egg or not, but his number on this bicycle is 85, which is the year that Night of the Living, Return of the Living Dead came out. So I'm kind
I
of
wondered
wondering
that
if
too.
if that was meant to be that, or just the guy just happened to have 85 on his number on his thing, and that happened to be it. But I kind of feel like it's like a little homage to the original, Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah, no, it definitely with you on that one. Like I want to say yes. And again, because at least I feel like I have to work myself up on this one, but I already kind of said it. At least Rave to the Grave tried. When it came to Return
Yeah,
of the Living Dead. At least they tried. I don't think you're gonna have purists. I mean, and don't get me wrong, to a certain degree, like I am one. We are purists when it comes to this franchise, but at least it's one of those things where it's like, at least they tried. Again, that party drug thing, it kind of it reminds me of like, just other like, again, it's sort of like a nod to the third one because basically taking a dose is what turned Melinda's Julia character into a zombie. And it wasn't uncommon for stuff around that time because it wasn't too long after that. Oh, God damn it. We're going to have to talk about this at some point too. Is that when the Lost Boys tried to do follow-up movies, and while there was one called The Tribe that it it worked better, I should say. It didn't work per se, but it worked better because of the way that, Corey Feldman's character, Edgar and stuff, was still hunting and trying to kind of get his life back and blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. But then there's the one that's the thirst, which is, again, making a party drug out of like vampire blood or whatever it was, where it was just kind of like, oh my God, why? How could you? Like, never was this ever going to work. But yeah, so anyway, like it tried, and that was the thing. I at least, like, if I'm going to be forced, if you're going to sit me down and be like, hey, we're going to watch one of the Return of the Living Deads, but it's going to be 4 or 5, I'm going to look at you and be 5, 100%. I'm like, if we're going to watch one, it's going to be 5. um But the funny thing is, on another comical aspect, is that like as much as everybody knows how much I love Danzig, and I always really like to support his movies. And even though Carolyn is a beloved, V&D alumnus, I loved her enthusiasm for Veronica. I've never pretended that Veronica was a good movie or well acted. And one of the things that used to drive me crazy was this scene of a dead naked girl being held up, and you can see her breathing, like noticeably see her breathing. And it bothered me that I was like, wait, Glenn, everybody knows about your love of like macabre and demonology and old school darkness and stuff like that. Like, if there was, whether you've got chops as a director is one thing, but as far as like continuity when it comes to like virginal sacrifice kind of stuff, you should have been way on top of this. But yeah, it was very, very similar to the whole like, wait, why do we still have this breathing body? Like before they come back to life? And don't tell me well, they're coming back to life. I'm like, I'm not talking about that part. I'm talking about the in-between time when they were clearly dead before like their heart got kick-started by the drug or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, so I mean, it is just one of those it's just one of those things, dude.
Yeah. That was probably like the hardest part of the rave to the grave. Yeah, it was like sitting there watching the people in the morgue just like breathing, and I'm like, I'm like, this is what happens when you get the extras from Romania that don't know how to hold their breath for more than 30 seconds. It's like, just don't breathe, man. Just you know,
Just hold it in.
hold it in for a couple seconds, man. Like shit, you could just hold it in and just keep using the same scene over and over and over again. At least give the director 5 seconds that he can just loop it for
Yes.
for an hour or something like that at least. But it's like it's like it's to the point where it's like whenever it's like when you watch the old like even in like even like I said, even in Return of the Living Dead 1 and 2, and even with 2 when they started getting comical, at least the zombies were still kind of being somewhat zombies, where you just see like people like that are not actors trying to be zombies, and it's all like, "Ugh." I'm like it just like I'm like, are you trying to be like like even when you watch like The Walking Dead and they had like the tryouts and all the kind of stuff where they were like the zombie walking school and stuff like that to kind of show you, because I want it to be more of like how it's natural and you're kind of just slumping where it's just like some of those bad ones. I'm like, are you watching Return of the Living Dead versions of zombies, because those are a little bit more that kind of stuff, but I always thought it was funny. But but when it comes to like the 4 and 5, it was just like it's one of those ones where we've talked about that, and like it, and it goes to saying that how do I want to put this, that the vampire's choices of franchises has seemed to continuing on when he picks these franchises that were like we talked about Witchboard, and how like it started off kind of strong and dropped really
Witchboard and
bad,
Warlock.
and the Warlocks have dropped really bad. I feel like this one is one of those ones, and then we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the Phantasm one. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that Phantasm 1 through 5 is a masterpiece, but I think
There
just
is
the
a
consistency of how they were. Yeah, they
yeah,
dropped down, but they didn't drop so bad. Where I mean, I know I'm not normally an IMDb guy, but like I said, for us the first two are Return of the Living Dead 1 and Return of the Living 2 are amazing.
yeah,
3, like I said, even though 3 doesn't get the credit that it should get, I don't really care about that score. That score on
yeah,
IMDb can be low. I don't think people got it right. That movie is not high.
yeah.
It's definitely a drop off from 1 and 2, but
But
it's
it's
not
but you're gonna
that
fight
bad of
for
a
it.
drop off.
But
Yeah, it's
like if
not
you
that
enjoy
drop
it,
off.
yeah, you're gonna fight for
Yeah.
there ain't no
But
fight.
4 and 5, those getting the 3.3s are deserving of 3.3s. Those are
I fight I
those
fight
are
I fight for the fact that five at least leaves you with a semi smile because of the return to the
yeah.
camp, to the return
Yeah, I
to
mean,
the
I definitely, like I said, yeah, I definitely agree that five is definitely the better of the two. Like we
yeah.
said, I mean, that doesn't say very much, but it's still definitely funny. Yeah, I just had to put that out there to let the Fangs and Infernos know and see if they keep
Yeah.
in score that yeah, but it's tough. I mean, especially with a franchise. If you look at it, there's not too many. I mean, I guess it really all ultimately depends on your opinions. Because like someone like me and you, we can talk about the Scream franchise, and we prefer. I'm not a huge Scream franchise guy, but you put those first two are really decent. I like the
Yeah.
first two. The third one was okay, and
It was
then the rest
okay.
of them, I don't give a shit about any of the ones that came out afterwards. That the
No.
one that what was it, five or whatever that came out. I didn't mind that one as much if it would have just ended. But then the second I found out they made six, I was like, nope, five sucks even more now. Because before I was like, okay, I could deal with it, and then them now making seven and all that kind of stuff. I was like, it's just one of those ones where like, but like I said, to me, that's my opinion. There are
Yeah.
people who think Scream 1 through 7 are amazing. Same thing with
Yeah.
Saw. I'm a huge Saw person. Not all the Saw movies were that great. There are a couple of them that I think are just completely awful. But as a whole, I've always liked the Saw franchise. That one
Yeah.
I would go more to bet than the scary movie, or not scary movie, the Scream ones and stuff like
Greenwood.
that.
No,
But yeah,
for
it's just
sure.
even with Friday the 13th, you know what I mean? When you do a elongated series and stuff like that, it is tough to try to keep it good enough and doing like that, which is ultimately I think is a good thing that as much as it's gonna pain me because I don't want to see it in, but I'm kind of glad that as of right now, at least Damien only wants to do this last one as the fourth one, and that's gonna be it. He wants to end it, which is good because one, two, and three are solid. As long
Yep.
as four is still solid, which I have a feeling it's going to be just as solid as the three, don't let the franchise drop. Don't let the franchise become like most franchises and have that shitty one where all of a sudden you're like, yeah, 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 I want to choose Terrifier as my franchise. Oh yeah, Terrifier 1, Terrifier 2, 3, and 4 are really good. Oh, but 5, 6, 7, and 8 are like 1 point somethings.
No, and it is that same thing. Like same. Like I think the first two Screams are great. I like them just fine. The third one, it didn't really do it for me. I liked it okay. I enjoyed it just fine, but as much as we love Jay and Silent Bob, having them awkwardly spliced in for this random scene, which I know was because it was part of the whole partnership thing with using Scream as a reference in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Like I get it, I understand, but it was just so random. But
Yeah.
I've never been overly high on part three. I will say part four never bothered me personally. I always kind of enjoyed part four for it being such a large gap away from the movie, from the franchise. You know, I was like, I can I can go with this. This was nice. It made me gave me some nostalgia feels, and I thought it was well acted. It was nice to see Nev Campbell back and stuff like that. But then yeah, when there was a five, I was like, oh God, they're gonna try again. And then when they went right to six and then ultimately right to seven, me and Mrs. Vamp were looking at each other like, fuck this franchise, man. And also same thing with like Hellraiser. Like, yeah, I'll and I know I'll die, but I'll die on the hill for the Hellraiser franchise, but I'm never going to pretend that there's not just an epic plummet when it comes to that franchise. Because unfortunately, as much as I can fight solidly for one through four, five, six, and seven leaves my dick out in the wind. We talked about it on a previous episode for video games. I do think that there's some solidness to part eight that I think people are kind of burnt by the time that Hell World gets there, and they don't really give it the love where I really think it's got some quality to it. But then that's also the last time we get Doug Bradley, and then we get an absolute train wreck that I will go out of my way to bury this movie in Revelations. I didn't hate Judgment. I really didn't. That's kind of part of my previous arguments on other franchises like that, like Return, where it's like, well, the good thing is they tried. When it came to Judgment, they made the effort. And I remember watching it and being like, you know what, this is okay. It is for what it is. I will say though, I do think the Hulu one with the female Pinhead is excellent. I really was impressed with how that one went out. And when I originally heard about it, I was not stoked about it. I'm not trying to, play gender police or anything, but I'm used to Pinhead looking and being technically of a unconfirmed gender, but we all know what I mean. I'm used to Pinhead being portrayed by this guy and executing the pinheadness in that way. But I really can't knock it. I thought that that movie was really, really well done, and it was nice to hear that Doug had signed off on the character as well. Um, but yeah, so it is one of those things. But again, we'll see like what feels get hit with the Fangs and Infernos once the Devil's Pole is erected for them to choose between Return of the Living Dead and Phantasm because ultimately, man, we know a lot of Return of the Living Dead people, but it's also going to be very, very interesting too, because I do feel like a lot of Return of the Living Dead people are going to vote for Return of the Living Dead because they're the older demographic that's very passionate about it versus the younger demographic, which even with Phantasm coming out in the 70s, there were more, like you said, consistent Phantasm movies as far as a product during their lifetimes to where some of our, 20 to 40 Fangs and Infernos might really have appreciated the consistency of the tall man character in those movies versus the 30s to 50s Return of the Living Dead Fangs and Infernos that might hit that button because Return of the Living Dead alone means so much to them. So we'll see how it goes. And look, I don't mind honestly taking the potential L on this one, knowing that there's such a drastic drop off just because like it's very, very clear because of my movie that I care a lot about this movie and this
Yeah.
franchise.
Yeah,
But
I mean
so
that's probably how I'm gonna do it on the thing too on the poll. I think I want to. I mean, people aren't probably gonna read it and they're probably not gonna understand it and they are gonna go. But I want them to do it. Yeah, don't. I mean, if you're gonna vote for either one, but I mean, if you're gonna vote for return, I want you to do it as a full franchise of
yes,
all of them, not just of how much you love one. Because of course, yeah, if we're gonna put, I mean, even to me, I love the first Phantasm movie. I'm a huge Phantasm person. I have the ball on my freaking tattooed on me and stuff like that.
yep.
But if I had to choose between which one I like better, Return or Phantasm,
Oh, yep.
I'm gonna pick Return of the Living Dead. I think that movie is a better movie than the first Phantasm movie. That doesn't
Yep.
mean that I think, ultimately, me personally, if I was choosing, I would choose the Phantasm um franchise over the Return of the Living Dead. But that doesn't mean, like I said, that's mainly because 4 and 5 were so bad that, to me,
Right.
in my opinion, 1 through 5 of Phantasm was at least always entertaining. Yeah, some weren't as good as others, and there was some stuff about each one, which we'll talk about when we do when we do the Phantasm breakdown. But yeah, that's what I kind of want to word it. Like, don't. If you're voting for this, vote for the full franchise. But then
Yeah.
again, I feel like most people are going to be like, "Oh, Return of the Living Dead one's so great. Yeah, I'm going to pick that one over that anyway." And it's like, well, yeah, but that's not the question. The question is the franchise overall. Like
Yeah.
which franchise do you like overall? But I kind of feel like most people are, like you said, are just going to be like so nostalgic from that for that first Return of the Living Dead that I feel like a lot of the votes are going to go like that. So yeah, definitely like kind of contemplate on how I want to word that poll, just because, like I
Mm.
said, I definitely want to make it where it's more of like, Return of the Living Dead as a whole franchise, not as just singular movies, as a whole
I'm
franchise.
thinking, yeah, again, because you less words are more, especially for that. And I'm thinking kind of the same way, Devil. And I'm thinking if you word it something in the ballpark to where you use those words quickly, if it's like which franchise, keywords franchise, you know, is superior
Yeah, what
between
full
Return of the Living
franchise or
Dead
something?
and Phantasm. Yeah. Like, which full franchise, keyword franchise is superior between Return of the Living Dead and Phantasm? I'm thinking if you put the clarity of what we're looking for right on Front Street before they even get to the words of like get to the movie titles might help in something like that. But
Yeah,
again, who knows, man? Because again, not that the Phantasm artwork isn't epic, but man, those zombie trash and zombie suicides are very well known and very well liked. And actually, just for what it's worth, shout out to those two cosplayers who I don't know who they are that have been making their rounds lately in horror cons that do this absolutely epic version of zombie trash and zombie suicide from the classic cover. Like
yeah,
those things,
yeah, yeah. You
those
haven't
things.
seen them on the con circuit. They're pretty. That. I mean, as far as some of the some of the the cons that we go to and the people cosplaying, that's definitely up there on the level. Which is kind of funny. Speaking of con, it's kind of off the topic, but kind of on the topic. I just thought it was kind of funny that apparently at San Diego Comic Con they had. Johnny Depp was coming out doing his Ebenezer Scrooger thing,
I
and they
saw
had some
that.
cosplayers. They had some cosplayers that were Tim Burton character, or Johnny Depp characters, and the one guy was Edward Scissorhands, and Ebenezer Scrooge asked him how he went to the bathroom.
No. Oh, I
He's
didn't hear that, but I
like, "How do
did
you go to the
see
bathroom?" and something like
I
that.
I did see his character, like the fans dressed as characters when Johnny came out as Ebenezer. I did see that too, but I didn't hear that he had said anything. But that's definitely a good one too. So yes, zombie trash and zombie suicide. You know, keep doing your thing. You guys look amazing, but come on down to a con that me and Devil go to as well, because definitely would love to take a picture with you guys. So as of
Yeah,
right now,
maybe even
that's the way it's
do a
gonna
zombie interview.
exactly. As of right now, Fangs and Infernos, that's the way it's going to be. As you guys know, we absolutely love our Return of the Living Dead franchise. Myself particular, and of course Devil as well. But we're not going to pretend like it's not out there. That it does have an epic drop, unfortunately, like previous franchises that we've discussed, or just the franchise curse for whenever movies kind of get past that 3 to 4 movie spot. It's very tricky. I find that 3, even though they talk about the sophomore slump, I feel like 3 can still give you a pretty solid franchise to be happy about. Notable exceptions, Witchboard, notable exceptions, Warlock. But that being said, there definitely can be strength in a 3 spot. It's when you really try to stretch it out and try to keep making things work that might not work. So love Return of the Living Dead, fucking awesome franchise, but an absolutely definitely has a death drop when it comes to it. So that's the way it's going to be as of right now, but we look forward to seeing what you guys have to say about it as we get ready to discuss a little bit of Phantasm. Devil, my friend, I think we should have a little quick conversation about everybody's respectful celestial abodes, where it be my little coffin where I lay my head at night, or at times that you feel that you just want to go back down to make sure that hell's not getting out of whack while you are away. Let's talk about it. Vampire and Devil's newest partnership in Twisted Vines, our dear friends, Chris and Sarah and Cadaver.
Oh yeah, you like scary stuff, you like horror decor, come and check out Twisted Vines. They make all the kind of cool shit, all for your house, all kinds of scary shit. They love it. You like to bring back the horror, you want to scare your neighbors, you want to conjure up a friend to talk to, you want to conjure up somebody bad, you want to do some bad stuff to them, you go to Twisted Vines and get some of their merch. Absolutely, for sure. Everything is completely handmade by them. So if you need a little friend, maybe a round set abode, maybe you want to conduct a little evil towards a friend that was a friend, maybe no longer a friend. They have voodoo dolls they can do for you to allow for such activities. But you know how much we love our Ouija boards, my friend, and they make all of those by hand. They took care of your beloved vampire with a nice Nosferatu board, but the devil, he happens to be a Munsters fan, and not only do they do boards as traditional rectangles, but they can put a little bit of coffin flair in them. Oh yeah, look at that coffin shape Munster board. Yeah, You want to conjure up Mr. Herman? You want to ask him how Pet Cemetery was? You can do it on this board. Oh, yeah.
Absolutely, my friend. So again, thank you so much to Twisted Vines for partnering with the Vampire and Devil podcast, and make sure that you Fangs and Infernos are checking them out on their Facebook page, on their Instagram pages, and making sure that you are checking them out as they move around the country, showing their craft off at all of the various horror cons and oddities expos that they love to do. So absolutely, my friend. Of course, man, horns up, fangs out for our friends at Twisted Vines.
Oh, yeah.
Devil, my friend, I think it's time that we spill the tea. Brutalities. Vampire and Devil podcast couldn't be more excited, more humbled to let you all know that we have partnered with very dear friends of ours for a long time in Brutalities. And there's so much great stuff, so many flavors, so much to enjoy, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about it. Isn't that right there, my friend?
Oh, yeah, we like it hot. Of course, the Inferno likes it hot. Do you like the hot tea? Well, you might as well get some brutality. Yeah, horror movies, puns, rock and roll. Brutality's got it all.
Absolutely. When it comes to the vampire, you know that he's going to absolutely gravitate towards that Nosferatu or that Nosferatu brew. Absolutely a favorite of mine. And we got to show a little bit love to, by all means, the biggest franchise in horror right now. That would be Terrifier. So Brutalities has brought you Terrifier. But that's just from the vampire. The devil has some favorites of his own.
Oh, yeah. Do you like the movie Pumpkinhead? Well, how about a little pumpkin bread for your throat holes? And like I said, with the rock and roll fans and the horror fans, Wednesday 13 fans, do you like Wednesday 13 and tea? How about a couple of those? With the Summertime Suicide and a couple other ones too. So if you like Wednesday 13 and you like the tea and you like the brutalities, go to the website.
Absolutely. And so, of course, we like to look out for those that look out for us. We love you, Fangs. We love you, Infernos. But as a courtesy from Brutalities to be bestowed on you, we have that Vampire and Devil coupon code, don't we, my friend?
Oh, yeah. You want to save a little dough, little cheddar, maybe buy some more shit? Go on the line, Brutalities, type in Vampire and Devil, and you get 10% off your order. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So it's getting into the chilly weather. People need to warm their bones. They need to warm what little skin they may or may not have. But Brutalities is the way to get it done. So that's the way it's going to be, because Vampire and Devil said so. Horns up, fangs out for Brutalities. And that's the thing, Devil, as we now move into Phantasm, just like we discussed, I think it's pretty undebatable to safely say that the one thing that is definitely true about Phantasm, and again, I can't say it enough in this episode of how much I love Return of the Living Dead and how much it means to me, there is a definite just consistency that comes from Phantasm. Now, do the movies stay on a super par with each other? No, I think it's safe to say they don't really totally do that. There is a little bit of roller coaster to it, but I definitely think it is safe to say, just like we've already discussed, that you're 100% right. When it comes to Phantasm, my friend, it's definitely consistently more quality films by what the common populace of horror fans would consider a consistent horror franchise.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know what I mean? It's always, like I said, it stays in that trajectory where it's like, yeah, bar none, I'm a huge Phantasm fan, and like I
Yeah.
said, we'll get into it. I'm not saying that these movies are like, top tier horror films where they're tens and stuff like that to begin with. You know
No.
what I mean? They definitely, even from the first movie, it definitely has got its cheese. It's
Yeah.
definitely got its like low budget. It's definitely got its fun, but it's like I said, it's definitely not like the high quality. So I'm not saying that it's not like going super high and then going, it stays pretty trajectory really good, kind of in
Yeah.
that mid grade, and then drops a little bit when it gets to the further ones, but they stay within the same vicinity of each other. It's not a drastic drop. It's not like we're going from like eights and nines, or even like a seven to like a one or a two or something like that. It stays in that range where it's still fighting. it still gives you a quality movie. It's still something that you can watch and you can have fun. But yeah, it's like I said,
Yeah.
and it's just a cool. Like I said, for me, I've always liked the story of this, just mainly not only because you know one of my passions in in dealing with all the devilish things I like to do. I've always been fascinated and have worked in morgues, and I've loved the whole like mortician kind of stuff. So I've always liked this, and it's like what are the what are those morticians doing with those bodies? Well, maybe maybe there's a big tall man that works at one of those mortician mortuaries, and he can lift a whole entire casket by himself, even though 4 or 5 men, are picking it up. He can pick it up by himself, and maybe he's turning your loved ones into quote unquote maybe unofficial jaw walls, which I always thought was funny, and that's always been the joke. And I didn't realize that like even though this movie was made in 1979, so by the time this movie was made and came out, or at least was completely out, Star Wars has already been a thing. But the
Mhm.
funny thing about it was, that they actually started making this movie way, as far as writing it and getting, what they want to do with it before the Star Wars movies even came out. So I think it's kind of funny that you have a character that looks like a Jawa that's kind of got that same Jawa sort of aspect. Obviously, the Phantasm ones are a little bit more menacing, and you can kind of see their faces and stuff, and But I still think it's funny though. It's like people think, oh, they just stole that from Star Wars, and it's like actually, they came out around the same time, and when they were writing stuff, even though George Lucas had wrote, most of that stuff had been written, they probably have filmed all that stuff. But you got to realize when Star Wars came out in '77, they were still writing this. He was, and he was writing this, Don Coscarelli was writing this movie like in the, in around that same time, 75, 76. It's not like
Yeah.
making movies now where you can kind of see what's happening behind the scenes, or you maybe get a little bit of scoop back then in the 70s. Yeah, that shit was tight-lipped, you know what I mean? So there was no
Yes.
way that someone would have been like, hey, I'm working on a film. I mean, even when we talked to Steven, about Return of the Jedi, and that's 82. Star Wars have already had two
Right.
movies and been big. They still kept things pretty secret about, he was talking about us about Billy D Williams being in this movie, and he's like,
Yeah.
even then he was like, hey man, I'm working on this movie in the UK. He couldn't even really tell them kind of what it was because they had to kind of keep it still even secret. So yeah, I think it's all funny with the Jawas. But now that I watch it more, it's like you do look at it and it's like it's kind of funny that these movies that both came out in the '70s have like two versions of what Jawa, or what these kind of creatures will look like. But yeah, like I said, I've always loved this movie. I think as far as like the tall man, I always thought he was up there and one of he doesn't get the acknowledgement or the love or the accolades
No.
like your traditional slasher, like Texas, Leatherface or Freddy Krueger or any of those guys. Yeah, the tall man. He doesn't really get the
like the fact
accolades
that
of.
they like the fact that they made him, I felt like obligated. Exactly what you're saying, Devil, was the fact that he doesn't seem to get that love. I was like, and again, being we're both Angus Scrimm people, is I was like when
Yeah.
this got released, I was like, I mean, you know me, I don't need to stomp over anybody over Funko Pops, but I was like, if I come across the tall man, that feels like an obligation.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, but I like, like when you go to, even when you have, conversations, and you see people talking about horror films, and they're like, "Who is your, your favorite, horror villain or something like that?" And I'm not saying that the tall man needs to be in people's favorites, but you
No.
know what I mean. But when people talk about, just horror villains in general, I don't feel like he gets the love that he gets because he's such a great, great villain. Now, the one that does get a little bit more love that you find everywhere, like I said, I have it tattooed on me, are the spheres. I always loved the spheres. I think those are really cool. I think the liberties that they kind of took with them later on in the series got a little bit
Yeah.
too hokey pokey for me. I like the straight up old school, just balls of death that either have blades coming out or a drill coming out.
I do appreciate that they did put it in his hand though.
Yeah.
So, but no, you're definitely right on that. And I'll tell you, Devil, you and I have been to so many cons now that like, and there are some creators out there who have definitely done some really bitchin' like Phantasm spheres and stuff like that. And I definitely look at them and give myself a little bit of, going back to our conversation back about Angus Scrim and a little bit of buyer's remorse that both of us in our early days of cons, when we might not have had the funds or might have already been getting too many autographs or whatever, lost out on a couple of opportunities to meet Angus. I definitely do see these spheres, and I have a few times come home being like, man, really would love a fucking Phantasm sphere that just sits in my office for me to just look at and admire. And I don't even need to touch it again after I buy it, but it just feels like something that I need. But who
Yeah.
knows? We'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah, I
But
mean I
anyway,
feel the same way too when it comes to that because it's like it's not saying and I'm not saying this I'm saying it more because of me because I'm cheap, but like I said, it's not saying that these people aren't making awesome products. I mean, those spheres
amazing.
look awesome. They're not cheap, they're not
Yeah.
super expensive, but it's not like, throwing away 20 or 30 bucks. You're talking about, 80 to $300 for some of those. And that's one of the, like you said, it's one of the things that I wish that between that and like some of those realistic Hellraiser boxes that people have made, I've
Yeah.
always like wanted both of those. But then again, I go, do I really need to spend $300 for that? I mean, there's been a couple other ones where we've gone to cons before where we've seen people who have made like make like the puppets and stuff like that. I've seen some kick-ass freaking like krites, the critters and stuff
Yep.
like that I'm like, oh my god, I'd love to take those home. But yeah, I don't want to spend $300, even to the point where I had we talk about Charles Band and we talk about freaking Puppet Master all the time. I've almost bought
Oh
one from
man.
him of one of the original Puppet Masters, but at that time he was, which I wish I would have bought it now because they're way more expensive now. But at that time he was gonna sell it for like 200 bucks or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I mean that's a good deal, thank you, but I'm like, yeah, I don't have 200 some dollars just to throw away for a freaking for a toy.
Oh no, exactly, Devil. I mean, even my little crate right here, like it was a con. I think it was New Jersey Horror Con. It might have been MMC, but I think it was New Jersey Horror Con. But they were selling him for like 30 bucks, and he's really
Yeah,
cool. And I was
yeah,
like,
like that
okay,
one I can see. That one
I was
I'm
like,
I'm
I'm
cool with.
down for that. But some of them, like they move, they do this, they do that, and it'll be 200, 300 bucks. And again, Fangs and Infernos, we are not downplaying or abusing like independent like horror like people like artists and stuff. We love this genre so much. This is why we do this show. But like, sometimes if you can get just a slightly more simple, like you can't put your hand in his mouth. Like it's a very just simple backing and but it's still very well done and it's a little bit more cost effective. That's literally all that we're saying. If we get the opportunity to get something from a character we love, that's a little bit more cost effective. We appreciate that, but we definitely admire some of these horror, like, special effects people that really slay it, like on a insane level. Because,
Yeah,
like, for
yeah.
like what you were saying, Devil, with like Charles Band, like he does sell like a replica of the Bloodstone. And I'm willing to bet that there's nobody on this planet that feels they need that more than me, considering that's my favorite full moon series. But at the same time, it's like, I don't always have $300 to just kick out for like a like that high quality of a replica versus if I could find an artist or a provider out there that does like a subspecies bloodstone that's a little bit more cost effective, like somewhere in the range of like 30 to $50. Call me.
Yeah.
So, because I would absolutely love to get that. But anyway, Devil, let's jump a little bit onto the Phantasm train there, my friend, because again, like we were saying, this is a it's a quality franchise. For 5 movies, it's actually a pretty solidly quality franchise. I will say though, and we'll get into the details a little bit more when we get there. Phantasm actually does have one of those situations too, where I personally have considered it, and I'm glad I didn't pull the trigger on it on previous episodes. Um, so it allows us to talk about the franchise. Is Phantasm actually does fall into the area of movies I have considered for better sequels because I really do love Phantasm 2. I think that movie is so fun, is so entertaining, and is so good. Phantasm, don't get me wrong, as we're getting into it right now. It's what starts the franchise. It's fantastic. Angus is amazing, and I love the story and the concept of this kind of supernatural mortician. I just do happen to find Phantasm 2 to be on a pretty quality level of a really enjoyable, entertaining, fun movie. But anyway, we're going to jump into the 70s first and foremost as we talk a little bit about Phantasm and the way that it gets started off. And again, I mean, Don is an amazing director. You and I were talking off the air just casually about like Masters of Horror and stuff. And of course, Don's involved in that as well. Don himself is such an amazing director. But at the same time, you've got a really, really cool like cast in this because you've got, of course, you've got like Michael Baldwin, but you've got Reggie Bannister, who's like the most consistent character in the whole franchise.
Yeah, yeah, he's the I mean, other than Angus Scrimm, he's
Right.
basically, the main guy in all the movies, you know what I mean? And I think it's funny, but you're talking about, about the sequels. We're gonna jump a little ahead and then we'll come back. You know who doesn't like Phantasm too? the the main kid, because all of a
Is
sudden
the main guy.
he gets recasted, and then eventually in three comes back, and there's been big interviews where he talks about how much he doesn't like Phantasm 2. But I agree with you.
So good.
I love Phantasm 1. I think it's a cool story, it's a good concept, but I like 2 just because it's got that more. You're already starting. It's starting already. It doesn't have. You're already into the thing, so you're just going, and it's just action, 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 action. Where the first one still, got to build up a little bit of story. There's a little bit of
Yeah.
like slow burn into it because you're talking. The kids got to go around and try to figure out what's going on, and there's a lot of slow scenes, a lot more like kind of emotional scenes, and you're not 100% exactly sure what's going on. I mean, that's kind of like the concept of all the phantasms, I think, until maybe towards the end where you're not 100% sure whether or not it's actually true or not. Is it a dream? Is it not a dream? Is it just a sequence? Is he just imagining this kind of stuff like that? But yeah, I always just thought it was cool. I always thought it was, like I said, the movie itself was always fun. And like I said, it's who doesn't like seeing a sphere going into someone's head and
Oh yeah.
draining the blood out. I just love the whole concept of it. I love the fact that our main guy Reggie is an ice cream man, so
Yep.
he's just slinging the ice cream, and then all of a sudden decides to make a triple barrel shotgun and just starts going and kicking ass and some he's just like I said, you get people like who have been consistently in movies. Like we'll just say like I can't remember the character's name right now all of a sudden because I'm drawing a blank. But the main tote guy from Tremors, he's always in all the movies. You know what I mean? He was now I'm
Oh.
trying to remember her name.
Well, he played the character Ugg, but I mean not Tremors, sorry. Oh damn it.
Bert,
Ed.
no,
He
no,
played the
no, Ed,
no.
yeah. But he was all at the
Ed
guns
Ward,
and
Ed Ward.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then all of a sudden, his wife is Reba McEntire in the first movie, and he's in all the movies. That guy,
Oh
you
yeah,
kind of,
yeah, sorry. Not Ed Ward. That was the right-hand man of Kevin Bacon. I know exactly who you're talking about, Devil.
but yeah, yeah. But whenever he's going, and you kind of think, when the first time you see about this guy, the trimmer goes in, and he starts blasting the shit out of him. They got 9 million guns, and we got him. You kind of know Bert. I think his name is Bert, or is
Yeah,
Bert?
no, the characters were. Oh, there we go. Michael Gross.
Michael Gross, yes. but yeah, his character is a badass when you first see him, and he's a badass through all five, six, 7,000 Trimmer movies there are now. And Phantasm is kind of like where you start off with Reggie Bannister, he's wearing an ice cream, the old school like 70s ice cream suit. He's got a bald head and he's got a ponytail and he's slinging a guitar and singing weird songs and you're kind of like, okay, this guy's kind of a dork, but he's cool, whatever. And then all of a sudden, towards the end of the movie, he kind of becomes a badass. And every movie, he becomes more of a badass and more of a badass and more of a badass. And you're like, okay, this ice cream guy might be cool. But like I said, with Trimmers, where you kind of knew he was a badass. But yeah, I always like that, where it's like, yeah, don't don't uh don't think twice about the ice cream man. He might be slinging more than some rocky road.
Oh no, absolutely. But I love the overall, and again, it does have a slow burn to it, but I've always actually really liked, in fact, borderline loved the origins of this Phantasm movie. The whole like died by suicide thing, like the whole like, you know, coming in to like, murder, like, you know, Tommy being like stabbed to death. Like there's so much in the initial groundwork of this movie. I also love the fact that this movie doesn't wait too long to bring the sphere in, where even something, a franchise that's not only built around a character, but also built around, for lack of a better term, a weapon. I've always loved the fact that they brought it in pretty quick and didn't really make it kind of like this casual little like side thing that maybe he would like throw out periodically. It was something that they really brought in on like the forefront like really quickly, and that was something I always really loved about this one. I thought Angus's portrayal was great. I just love the simplicity of his character. I think that's one of the reasons I've always loved Phantasm the way that I do, is simply because like when you do get a franchise that's built around a specific character, even in the other franchises that we've talked about, even the ones that didn't go so great, like Witchboard, fantastic, but it's built around an inanimate object. It's not really built around a person. Same thing, but when you look at something like Warlock, it is based around a specific person, a specific character. But also, the franchise tried to kind of go more into that, well, anybody can play a warlock, as opposed to Julian, who is absolutely fantastic in the role. And that has a lot to do with where the dive kind of came from it, where it stays very consistent, where you've got Angus playing this consistent mortician character the whole time with this consistent like weapon that spherically comes in when it needs to. And even the simplicity, even back in the 70s, of when that thing like hits your face like with the blades, but then puts the drill into you and just all that secondary thing. There's a lot of simplicity to this movie that, while I love the fact that it does have a sometimes slow burns kind of work for me, sometimes they do work against me. This is one of those slow burns that kind of works for me because they kind of jumped into it quickly, which I really liked, and then kind of built the story afterwards. Kind of Boondock Saints Pulp Fiction style, where it's like, we're going to hit you right off the bat with some blood to make you happy. But now we're going to kind of let you know why it's going the way it's going. And that's the thing I really kind of like about this movie. You've already got the idea of why these characters were killed. Now it's getting into the main characters and Reggie's character and the ice cream man and kind of building towards. Then, Angus splices in when it's appropriate for him to do so. It's a very, very kind of unique and interesting way that Don did it, that I also find gives me a little bit of that. I'm wondering if Don is kind of portraying a little bit of the way that Dario would look at movies and try to do things as well. Because I do feel with the Phantasm series, at least with what Don was involved in, I felt that he definitely had a very similar way of looking at storytelling to where Argento did as well.
Yeah, I mean that's the like I said, that's the one thing I always liked about that with the tall man throughout, in this movie, starting off with and then kind of, building on later on was, yeah, he was like he was more to me all honesty, I mean, like I said, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge Michael Myers fan. Michael Myers is badass. Freddy Krueger's badass. Jason's badass. All these guys are kind of badass, but they're more of like what would be considered more fictional kind of characters,
Yeah.
where even though you do find out a little bit later, throughout the series, that the tall man is sort of a supernatural kind of character, but then, to begin with, you really don't get into that much. He's just a really creepy freaking mortician guy. And I just think that,
Yeah.
and it's just so subtle, like, he doesn't, he's not, he's more of like just shows up and kind of jump scares you. I mean, the closest thing to him being scary, which I still love, which they, throughout the series, they, keep on doing, but, just his menacing like voice where he's like, boy, just that
Yep.
way, the way he just says that, man, he just like gives you the willies every time he says that. You're like, ooh, geez, it's creeps. Like I said, it reminds me like a lot of, and probably, maybe they could have built some of his character based off his character since Poltergeist came afterwards, but kind of like, the preacher guy in Poltergeist in 2 and 3, where
Yes.
he's not very like menacing because he's not like coming at you with like, razor hands, or, a sharp knife or a big ass machete or something like that. He's just more like creepy, kind of like he could be your uncle. You're not quite sure. And that's what the tall man kind of is like. He's kind of like, your crazy uncle that you don't really not 100% sure with. He's kind of weird. You don't know whether or not he's touchy feely. He might be a little touchy feely. I'm not saying that Angus Scrim, not the character, but the tall man was maybe, touchy feely, as far as some of that stuff. But
Yeah.
he gave you that kind of like creeper kind of vibes and stuff
Like
like that. But
you can picture him looking through the window.
yeah, yeah, he looks like he could be a peeping Tom kind of thing. He's got the tallness, so he can kind of hide in the bushes and stuff like that. But yeah, he just kind of gave you that more, like, to me, gave you the willies more. You're like, ooh, this guy's kind of just something's weird about this guy. Something's off. And then, like I said, obviously you find out, when it comes later on in the movies about his character, from back in the Western times or something like that. But then in this one, you find out, he's kind of from another universe, another planet, or whatever you want to call that, wherever they send them to, I guess, the dunes where the sand. I was waiting for like the Beetlejuice sandworms to kind of come out of nowhere throughout the whole entire time they go into that weird world. But yeah, the one thing that, like I said, the consistency of that and the consistency of the movie, going on from 2, 3, 4, 5, all of them, are, I always found it funny is, other than one character, and don't trust the women in a Phantasm movie, because more than likely 99% of them, except for a couple random characters throughout it, are partly Angus Scrim. You know what
Right.
I mean? And I love that. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I said, I'm a huge Reggie Bannister guy. I think he's great. Like I said, maybe that look might have been cool in the '70s, but I'm just saying, in general, a ice cream man that's predominantly bald and has a ponytail is not, I'm not saying he can't. I'm not saying he can't get a good woman.
Yeah.
He's gonna get a good woman that's gonna treat you good and treat you well and stuff like that. He's not gonna get these hot hot chicks that
Mhm.
love him, and yet every time there's a hot chick that gives him a little bit of attention, he just like, oh yeah, this is normal. Every time it ends up being a bad Angus Scrim girl trying to kill him, and it's like, come
Yes.
on, man. I mean, look in the mirror, dude. Like, you're not freaking Tom Cruise. You're not Brad Pitt. You're not Timothy Chalamet. You're not Johnny Depp. You're not any of these guys, man. Like, you're an average looking dude. You're gonna ploy mostly, especially unless you're a multimillionaire, which you're not a multimillionaire. You're a freaking ice cream man driver. So
Right.
you're gonna get average women. I'm not saying that a hot woman could not be attracted to you. Yeah, but more than likely, all these hot women throughout Phantasm 1 to Phantasm 5 that come after you, yeah, you need to start figuring that out. And I always laugh about it because it always happens in the movies, and then all of a sudden he's like, Jesus Christ, man, there are all these women trying to kill me or whatever. And I'm like, dude, you haven't figured it out yet, man. Don't trust the good looking women when you're an average dude.
Yep, 100%. No, for sure, Devil. And that's the thing too. I mean, you got when it comes to this movie, as we start to bridge our way into the second one, I mean, you've still got like all of that like uniqueness to it, where you've got the psychic grandma character, which I found was a very, very interesting character to kind of put into this, all the way to when it comes to the end of the movie, ultimately kind of wondering, if it's a dream, like, is it reality? And then sets the bridge into a second movie. Because the one thing I will say about the Phantasm movies, I feel you can safely say that these movies were designed to be a franchise. How far they wanted to take the franchise was completely up to the studios or the directors or whoever would have been in charge of making those decisions. But I do feel that the Phantasm was always designed to be somewhat of a franchise because each movie definitely seemed to leave a couple of questions unanswered, as opposed to other franchises that a movie still might have ended with a definitive this or that. This movie always kind of ended with that, but still left you wondering if a future continuation was in the works.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, even even with the end of this movie, like I said, you don't know what's going on. All of a sudden, he closes the closet door. He's got the mirror on the back. You see the tall man, and all of a sudden he grabs him and brings him through the wind mirror, and you're like, okay. And then about part two basically does like a montage of basically here's everything that you've seen in that first movie. Just the
Yes.
first 20 minutes of the movie is literally just recapping the whole entire movie again. I'm like, man, I
Which
just feel like I watched
I
Phantasm
hate
1
when
over
they
again.
I hate when they do that. But
And that's the thing about this franchise. They do that consistently throughout this whole part three when they bring back the original kid, they bring a lot of that. Part four, they go. I mean, it's funny to me because part four and part five, they even start using stuff that was on the cutting floors from
yeah.
from those movies and put them into this because it's like there's a scene, like when we get into it, there's a scene where they're talking, the boy and Reggie's talking, and I'm like, you can obviously tell it's not deep cut, it's not AI facial stuff. You can tell that it's from the 70s when they made it, yet it's a scene that you didn't see. It's a newer scene. It's not a scene that you saw in Phantasm, the first one, but yet they're having a full-on conversation. They're like, man, that's crazy that they're gonna use like cutting floor. Okay, we needed okay, the studio says we need to cut like 25 minutes of this movie. Okay, we'll cut a couple little these scenes or whatever. And then somebody down the line was like, oh, maybe we'll just keep them around just in case somebody wants to use them again. But it's funny though because like part two, part three, every time they use it, it's always the same recap again. You're always seeing him going into the thing, going into that, going in. I mean, to the point where I love that, except for the second one where they did. I love the
Yeah.
fact that they changed. Well, didn't change it, but all of a sudden, when you saw the recap of him moving around, you kind of saw him from behind, and you didn't really
Hmm.
see him, so that they can go okay. But I kind of liked the actor that they got for the second one with him being older and like that. I've always
Yeah.
liked him. I can't remember that actor's name, but I've always liked him and he's always been in like, the a bunch of movies and stuff that I've seen him and I like him. And like I said, I like the story of the second movie, it kind of goes into it where, the tall man is obviously you find out that he's done this to more towns and more places and stuff like that. You find out that there's a connection that he's got with this other girl that's been doing, and they kind of have like a connection with each other and have a connection with the tall man so they can see things, and they're kind of like a psychic a little bit, but more in tone of just the tall man's business. It's not like they're not going around betting on sports, like in Back to the Future, or they're not they're not like picking the winning lottery or any of that kind of stuff. But I love the fact that yeah, but even the tall man even knows that they have that connection because he fucks with them all the time, where like he finds a girl in one of the houses that looks like that girl. Then all of a sudden, like you see her, like her back kind of go up, and then all of a sudden, like the tall man comes out of her back and shit like that. And it's like,
Yep.
yeah, it's like again in this movie, you never really know whether or not you should trust the girls or not because sometimes, like I said, they almost always seem to be that. But yeah, yeah, I just like the continual story where, yeah, in the first movie, things happen and you're not sure what all happened, and all of a sudden you think the things happen, but then the kid's in a nut house, so you're not 100% sure. Okay, did all that stuff happen? And even Reggie's like, yeah, come on, man, like your brother died in a car accident. He didn't die. There wasn't this tall man. You're like, where were you? You were there in the first movie where the tall man was there. How do you not remember the tall man? How do you not remember the killer Jawas? Like, how do you think he's making this all up? So then then you start going in your head like, maybe none of that stuff was real, and only the boy is the only one that saw it.
No, 100%. And that's the thing too with like, when James is playing like, that character in the second movie and like it's, when he's playing the Mike character, because we'll get into Michael's return and stuff like that. But like that's just the thing I really like about that movie is despite the fact that like again, I don't really have a problem with movies or like I said, franchises that kind of decide in advance that they want to be franchises using old footage. The only thing that kind of drives me a little bit crazy is how much old footage you use because I'm like, it's more about the time that's spent in it. And some of that stuff drives me absolutely crazy, where I'm like, I don't really mind that you do a little recap. But when an hour and a half movie and almost a third of it is taken up by a movie I've already watched, that's what drives me crazy. I will say that being said, whether they planned it that way but also knew that that was a risk they were running, was turning fans off by doing that. Like I said, Phantasm 2 for me is a better sequel. I do like Phantasm 2 more than I like Phantasm 1. And I got to give credit where credit is due that after getting past that initial, like, you got to be kidding me. Really? You're just fucking talking about old shit. They definitely jump right into it and they've got some quality action on this. There's a little more bloodlust, there's a little bit more like aggression to the story of this. And that's what I really always loved about this movie. And even before we get in shortly to Phantasm 3, Phantasm 3 is a very interesting dynamic as well, because while it follows that same pattern of why are we watching the old movies again, there's a cult status that has made its way around Phantasm 3 that I kind of learned about secondary. That's kind of an interesting thing. But anyway, when it comes to Phantasm 2, like I like the way that they set it up. I don't personally think there was anything particularly bad about the way they did it. I just think it's always risky recapping an old movie when you do want to focus on a current one. But at the same time, you you can't really hate on the fact that they kind of seem to understand that and be like, okay, we're going to force feed them the old shit. So let's make sure we pack a punch here. And then, dude, you and I are white zombie people. So you got to love the fact that that's intertwined into some white zombie stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. Like I said, and it's funny too because obviously they recast people all the time, but obviously Mike in the original one was like I'd say he was probably like a teenager. So he was probably like, 13 to 15 or something like that. And, obviously, then the movie ends and this one kind of picks up like 5 or 6 years later. So he's aged a little bit, but, most 13-year-olds when you're 13 and then you see him again at 19 or 20, look pretty much the same, and maybe they've gotten a little bit
Yeah.
taller or they could have gotten bulkier or chunkier. The facial structure of like how he looks, then it's like they couldn't even get an actor that kind of looked somewhat similar. It was like two completely different bodies. And then, like
Yeah.
I said, then obviously they go back with the original. And when we get into part three, the original Mike, and it's funny though because it's exactly how I explain it. You think of a 13-year-old, you think of a 20-year-old, okay, he looks the same, just grown up. And that's exactly what, what adult Mike looks like. He looks exactly the same as he did as a kid, just as a grown-up version of that. So
Right.
it's so weird. It's so weird when they recast stuff like that sometimes, especially with something like that. Like I get, you know what I mean? They probably felt like, maybe the studio was like, we felt like this kid, didn't have really the chops or something like that at the time to do this, or there could have been other reasons why. Which we all, like I said, which we laugh about because that, when you talk, I've seen interviews with the original Mike, he always talks about how much he can't stand part two. He's like, that movie, I hate Phantasm 2. And I'm like, well, yeah, do you really hate Phantasm 2, the movie, or do you really just hate it because of the fact that they didn't cast you? And
Yeah.
then eventually, and like I said, I mean, when it goes on later on, because partly three, little studio, two was more of definitely studio one. Three was a little bit less studio interactions. Four and five obviously have way less, studio and more independent, styles to them and stuff like that. And obviously then the original Mike is in, one, jumps into three, he's in four and five. So two technically is the only movie that he isn't in. So I feel like, when it comes to that, that conversation with him, a little bit's probably just like, son of a bitches, man. Like, you really couldn't have, just recasted me again. Like, you had to recast, why couldn't you cast me? You had to recast me. Like, I wanted to do that kind of stuff where it's like, yeah, it's like, that's how I kind of feel with that, where I feel like, his hatred of part two is mainly just because of that, not necessarily the movie. Because like I said, I agree with you. I mean, I don't know if I 100% say that number two is a better sequel overall, but because I just love the originality of part one and that
Sure.
whole story stuff like that. But it's in that, to me, it's in that realm where, like we've talked about before, where like Gremlins 2 or something like
Yeah.
that, where it may not be the better movie, but it's a more fun movie. It's a more entertaining. And yeah, I definitely agree with part two. It definitely, other than that, montage of 15 minutes of shit we've already seen again, when it comes out of it, it definitely is a lot more crazier. You get a lot more cool kills. You get a lot
Yeah.
more cool special effects in this movie. You get a lot more spheres coming around. You get the Jawas coming around and monsters coming around. You get the killer girl that's kind of, going after Reggie, and at the very end, she's kind of all gnarly and fucked up and tries to go after him again. So it's, yeah,
A
it
tall
definitely.
man abducting Liz into the hearse is one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, even just like the whole scene of them getting sucked into the Urs is just cool. Like, yeah, I mean, overall, I think the second one, as far as like filming quality and just like, because obviously you can tell they had more of a budget on this movie, where they're like, okay, because Phantasm had a low budget, but it actually made decent amount of money. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it was one of those ones where the studio's like, hey, this is a cool idea. People obviously enjoy it. We're gonna put some actual money into the second one, when you can definitely tell. And that might could have been might be the reason why they recasted Mike to begin with. I mean, obviously you got to keep, there probably was something in the workings that they couldn't recast Reggie.
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, obviously, because it's still, as far as all this, until we get to five, Don directed all the movies until we get to
Mhm.
five. So
Yeah.
they definitely still had his, ploy. He probably fought. Maybe he was like, "Hey, man. I mean, I don't know what all happened. I mean, it's probably to the point where it's like, yeah, we really want Mike to come back too." And they're like, "Hey, we're giving you Reggie. There's no way we're giving you Reggie and Mike, or
Yeah.
we're not putting this kind of money into it." And maybe he had to make that kind of decision where it was like, who knows what happened behind that. But yeah, like I said, to me, I think like it to the point where, yeah, the second one was just, like I said, it's just more gnarly. It's a little bit more like, if all of our fangs and infernos that are, obviously metalheads and stuff like us, the first one's definitely more of your doom metal, the
Yeah.
sludgy kind of slow kind of, I'm gonna get you stuff. The second one is definitely more speed metal. It's definitely a lot more thrash, you know what I mean? It definitely,
100%.
when once it starts going and balls to the wall. And there are definitely a lot of balls and spheres coming in at you.
100%. And for me personally, I mean, that ending, it's so clutch, dude. I mean,
Yeah,
alchemy being alchemy being shown to never being human, almost kind of like an industry plant. Like,
yeah,
and then having the tall man show up in the back and fucking yank them through the back window, almost Nightmare on Elm Street style. Like,
yeah,
oh man, I fucking can't, but in a good way. It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
that for me, that ending is just so bitchin'. And at the same time, like it's a really cool continuation for a sequel that doesn't come out in what you would consider a traditional sequel time. It's like 10 years later that this movie comes out. So
yeah,
like it's pretty crazy that they actually do not only that Angus is down for the cause, Don is down for the cause. Michael, it just is what it is, but we're about to get into his return to the franchise right now. But I thought it was pretty cool. And maybe I would say that maybe that was their original plan, was the reason why they're bringing in this old footage is because the sequel is 10 years later. So it's like, hey, we really want to do a quality continuation. Let's remind you as to why and what happened. I just felt that they went a little overboard in the amount of time you're watching this old footage, which is usually always a pretty buzzkill for me. But again, I kind of got over myself pretty quick because they definitely revved it up once you got past that old footage, which was definitely something that I appreciated. But I've always been super hype on just the end of Phantasm too. Just that whole like, being an old school like wrestling fan when a lot of stuff that involves like, the Undertaker's character for any of our Fangs and Infernos that are old school wrestling people, like when he was threatening to abduct Stephanie and is like, where to, Stephanie? Or the time when, he abducted kind of general manager Teddy Long and he was like, buckle up, Teddy. There's just so much to that dark, sinister, trapped with nowhere to go that I just really appreciated about that the end of Phantasm too. So
yeah.
I always do love the ending of that movie, dude. It's so sick.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then like I said, going into the third one, obviously we mentioned, the return of adult Michael, you know what I mean, who
Adult
looks
Michael.
it looks exactly like he did when he was in the when he was the young Michael, it's
Looks
obviously
exactly like he should.
yeah, obviously 10 plus years, obviously later, he's a, probably in his mid 20s by now. But I mean, and the, Phantasm 3 kind of reminds me of, when we've talked about before with Hellraiser 3. It's one of those
Yeah.
ones that I feel like it's still a good movie that a lot of people just don't give credit. It's got
Yeah.
one of my favorite characters in the whole entire series. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, yeah, yeah, everybody likes Michael. Everybody loves Reggie. Everybody loves the tall man. Everybody loves the spheres. Everybody loves the jaw walls, man. Fuck that. I love the little kid in this movie, man. That little kid is badass, man. Fuck Macaulay
So
Culkin and
cool.
his Home Alone shit. This kid knows how to freaking make a trap house and make a real trap house. And he's not freaking, hurting someone's hand or putting steam. He's fucking people up. He's fucking people up so much that he's got graves all throughout his whole entire house of how many people he's killed trying to get into his house.
Dude, it was like when you and I watched Becky, where it was like the epitome of what would happen in Home Alone if instead of just kind of like injuring them, if Macaulay Culkin if Kevin McAllister had just lost his mind and just murdered Harry and Lloyd.
Yeah, and that's how that's the kid reminds me of, man. He's just badass, man. These guys are like, yeah, I'm gonna go into this house and get all this shit and get all that shit. Yeah, yeah. What happens? They get into the ground, and then it kind of, what happens? Something they haven't really done in Phantasm, which I love too. With obviously, in the first two movies, most of your dead people that came back usually came back as the evil Jawas. I like the fact that they brought back the house robbers that the kid fucked up as actual like zombies. They're like the full on zombies in this movie. It's like, wait, we got zombies in Phantasm now? Like, I know we got some weird dead people and we've got some weird ass like, killer, Jawa looking thingies, but it's kind of weird that we've got like
full on like straight up zombies in this movie.
Dude, it's crazy, man. I mean, yeah, Jodie's character is like so sick. And then we've also got like, yeah, but then we also, it's kind of interesting too that like outside of the Jawas, you actually get like names of some of these creatures like all of a sudden. So you actually have like something to say about them. Because it's funny, Devil, you would mention Pinhead. I like what you would mention Hellraiser. Pinhead wasn't originally even Pinhead. He was just Head Cenobite. That was
Yeah,
just his
lead
name.
Cenobite.
Lead Cenobite. So like he never even had a name, and then just eventually they just kind of gave him one, and that's just kind of what like stayed on. So then like the fact that all of a sudden it's like, hey, we're learning that these things are called lurkers, and that's
Yeah.
like pretty sick, and definitely really like that. But like at the same time, it's like you also get that other kind of cool secondary character who outside of Michael's return, Michael playing Michael's return to the franchise, is you also get your first glimpse at the character of Rocky, who's going to come back in later down the line as well.
Yeah, yeah, you got a girl who is a girl who survives. She's the only female in this series to survive, the series, because if you're a female in this, you're either dead or die, or you're
Yeah,
one of Angus Scrimm's little bitches.
yeah,
And she's not, man. I love her in this movie. She's over the top campy stupid. She kind of reminds me of
yeah,
what's her name from Return of the Living Dead, with the nunchucks and shit like that, and like
yeah,
Dream Warrior and all that. She kind of reminds me of her, but more campier, where she's just like they fucking people up with nunchucks and shit like that. But yeah, again, yeah, she's just this, badass female with, she got the freaking crew top going on and stuff like that. And yeah, she's one that, you find out, yeah, she's not a chick to mess with. And, even the tall man's not going to take her out. And, and she's actually a female that's not, the tall man's with the tall knees or whatever he is. Like you find out like this is a chick, which is funny because yeah, she doesn't. There's no love interest between her and Reggie. So I mean, I know there's some. He's obviously trying to get some from her. Like, which is kind of surprising because you're like the whole entire time you're like, come on, Reggie, stop going after the girls. I know you're a little, ice cream hornball. We all love sin and skin. We get it. I understand. I'm right there with you. But like I said, it doesn't work out. Well, this is the one time where like, eventually you find out, that she is legit a real person. She's not a bad person. She's not a white English. You're like, man, now you kind of wish Reggie would have hooked up with her. Because could you imagine, that concept of, obviously they didn't go that timeline, but all of a sudden, in the third movie, her and Reggie and Rocky, you know, do the wild thing, and all of a sudden make a kid. Could you imagine what that kid grows up in that world of being a badass and killing all these lurchers and sentinels and tallmans? And did you just imagine this kid being a badass? Well, that's kind of like what that little kid is. And it's kind of like the what if Rocky and Reggie had a kid in Phantasm 1? That would be the kid in Phantasm 3.
Oh, absolutely, dude, for sure. And that was the other thing too that I always found like really kind of like interesting, kind of like about this movie too, was like it was like one of the first times that like they're kind of like introducing this kind of like secondary, like, are you infected character? Like you look at movies like, the second Fly movie after Cronenberg's Fly, where they dive a little bit into like, what happens with the actual birth of this character and of this person, and are they going to have these type of things. But yeah, just the idea of like them just, doing the wild thing, and then like bringing in this character who's gonna, this child that's gonna like be so surrounded by these possibilities. And if you want to talk, it's almost kind of like Sparta. It's like, yo, you're gonna be hardened at like such a young age to just like be such a badass. And it's also like, but I also love a little bit of like the seeking out to this movie. Because, like I had said before, like in doing some research on this movie, just outside of watching it, I realized that this is actually a movie that has quite a cult following of people who genuinely love this specific movie of the Phantasm franchise, which I personally never actually knew. I've always loved the Phantasm franchise, but it was always on a casual thing. I love the first one, I love the second one, and then the third, fourth, and fifth ones, they were just kind of, they were just slices in the pie. Like, they tasted good, but like, they were just kind of whatever it was. But then it kind of learned how many people genuinely love this specific movie and how it has quite a cult following. But I also love just kind of the scene in particular with like Reggie finding like the mausoleum. That was always like one that I always like really, really liked in this movie. It's just kind of like that continuation of like discovery, which is something that I always found very interesting about this franchise, is they always find a lot of different little nuances throughout the franchise to like interject and kind of like splice in a level of discovery. And that's just something I always really liked.
Yeah, yeah, that and I'm from now I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure it's the third one. I'm trying to remember if it's the third one, the fourth one. They kind of blend in together sometimes when I think about it. But I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
the third one is when they brought back they also not only did they bring back Mike, they brought back the brother. And I'm pretty sure it's the third one when they bring back the brother and the brother is actually like in the sphere the whole entire time and he's using his head and he's
Yes.
trying to help him out and stuff like that. Yeah, I was like, yeah, it was like, oh, we're bringing not only over, obviously Reggie's coming back. Hey, we got the original Mike. We got his original brother all of a sudden coming back now too. But then the whole entire time he's there, he's not really there because he's kind of like imagination, but then he's really in the sphere, and then all of a sudden you see him kind of come out. But it's cool. But it's cool because they actually did bring the original actor, so you could definitely tell he's gotten older and stuff like that. So I always thought that was kind of interesting. I like the fact that they started doing these where the spheres had which is a possibility we never really knew about the first two movies, is that the the driving force of these spheres is that they do have a brain inside of them, and that's
Yeah.
some of the people got turned into the Jawas. Some of them, the tall man put a little brain matter into these, and that's kind of what made it where like you didn't know exactly. To me, I always felt like when you watch the first two movies, you always kind of felt like the tall man was sort of like we've used a lot of Hellraiser references, but kind of like Pinhead, where he's kind of controlling these balls and he's kind of like flinging them out. Where you kind of find out now that yes, he can control them. He does have some kind of little power over them, but you find out that they're what would be considered like AI. I
Yeah.
mean, it's definitely they're run by a brain, and that brain knows when to go after people and knows the people to go after. And sometimes that brain, even though he tries to, make the brain bad, obviously he takes the brain of the brother, and the brother's like, yeah, kind of going to even to the point where, he's going after the tall man. The tall man's got to turn him into a black, to a black rock or something like that, where it's like, it's kind of cool where he can kind of, even though he's somewhat controlled by the tall man, he still has the, obviously his brain, and he knows that he wants to protect his brother and he wants to protect Reggie, and that's like that
Mhm.
constant battle. I love that secondary battle where you have everybody else, but you also have his brother's character battling to try to help them out. But every time he helps them out, you know he's kind of leading into the tall man knowing, because the tall man can know where he's at all the time for him being a sphere. So I always like that concept when going into that and going into this series too as well.
Absolutely. And again, and this movie has a really cool, just cool ending as well. I mean, you've got the whole like concept between like, Rocky, departs and takes off and, leaves in the hearse, the continual theme there. And you kind of want to feel at the time that it's just going to be a wrap on her, but it's not. But then you've got, the sphere-a-thon that just like attacks like Mike, and then you ultimately get, Tall Man coming out, and you get like zombie attacks, and you get more characters dragged through windows. It definitely like a reoccurring theme, but it's like again just such a unique and again very consistent trajectory, even when it comes to the endings of these movies.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like I said, yeah, you're going, you go into four, and four gets, four and five get a little bit, like I said, four obviously, four is still directed by, Dawn. Five, it's still kind of written, story wise and stuff like that with Dawn, but it's a different director this time. But they get kind of weird because you're not 100%, even with four, now, you got it where, Mike's back, but Mike's not in the movie 90%. So
I know.
Mike becomes Pinhead apparently in the Phantasm world, where you still have Angus, you still have him. You find
Yeah,
out more about, where, like I said, Reggie's going around, he's trying to find, Mike's missing throughout the whole entire movie. You get little glimpses of him every little bit, but the whole entire movie really, doesn't have Michael in the movie very much. And you're like, okay, you're bringing back this character, but yet he's barely in it. Obviously, Reggie's going to be the main character and he's going around trying to find him. But yeah, I do like the fact that, yeah, you kind of go into that world where you first see, the tall man in his, in the 1800s or 1500s or whatever year it was, Western times and stuff like that, where he's like, learning about, him making this entrapment, and that's how he gets turned put into, into the world where he becomes who he is and stuff like that. But yeah, it's so weird because like I said, the fourth one gets it with that, and then even the, kind of combining, four and five a little bit together. Five, you're like, it goes to be the other way around where it's like, you know four, you're not 100% sure what's going on. He's missing. He's going around. He's trying to find. And then five is more like, is Reggie still going out? He's still trying to find the tall man. He's still trying to get Mike. But then it jumps into where he's in a hospital and he's got dementia and none of this stuff happened. And Mike is visiting him. And like I said, and it's really weird, and even to jump a little bit forward ahead, and we talk about five, but yeah, it's kind of like when they say like art, when you do that, and sometimes resembles life or it imitates real life, where
yeah,
in that movie, his character, Reggie's character does have the dimension. You're not really quite sure. It's definitely, you kind of figure out it's it is the tall man playing games with Reggie. So, kind of like how he was doing with Mike, where Mike, whether or not his stuff was happening was real or not real. Did his brother really die from a car accident, or did the tall man kill his brother and stuff like that? In this movie, you're not 100% sure whether or not he's actually going in town. Because one minute he's in the, the psychic ward and stuff like that. Then one minute he's out in his car. Then the next minute he's back in the ward, but then Mike's not there and he's talking to nobody. And then you're doing like that. But the crazy thing about it was, the dementia stuff like that was just a kind of added feature to make the storyline kind of weird, where you can jump around and not know exactly, what's going on. It's kind of, I know it's meant to confuse you. It's meant to be confusing because that's what the whole purpose of the movie is to be that. But then, ultimately, like, what, 8 months or a year after they made the movie, Reggie ends up getting, the Reggie, the real actor Reggie Bannister ends up getting dementia and getting form, that. So it's kind of crazy that his character, and when he was making the movie, had dementia, and then not even that shortly after, in real life, his character does, he does get real dementia, and I'm like, that's kind of crazy because, like, when you think about it, because obviously Fangs and Fenris who are fans of Reggie Bannister knew he had dementia, and it's kind of one of those
yep,
things where, like, you're like, okay, maybe he had it, and they put that into the movie to kind of add into it, kind of like with they did with with Val Kilmer's character in Top Gun, the second one, where they kind of made, his illness sort of part of his character, or people have done with Tim Curry and stuff like that, with with his illness, and kind of put it into a character in a movie and stuff like that. So you kind of felt like it might have been something like that, but then you find out that, oh no, he was completely healthy when he was. I mean,
yeah.
somewhat healthy. You know what I mean? He probably, we all have our aches and illnesses and things like that. But as far as the dementia thing, he didn't have any of that, and all that stuff, even though it was added into the movie and stuff like that, had nothing to do. And then it's just crazy that, like, to find out that, oh, that wasn't like, because when you watch it, when you watch it now, you're like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense that they added that dementia thing because he does have dementia, yes, Reggie does. But
Yeah.
then you find out, yeah, you found out that, yeah, that it was
Genuine
written,
coincidence.
yeah, just a genuine coincidence that his character does that. It's one of those ones where it's like, yeah, it's, whether or not, let's just, like I said, it's anything, an actor playing a movie and somebody's got, this disease, or let's say, not saying that he did, but let's just say, Michael J. Fox, back in the early 80s played a character that had Parkinson's, and then all of a sudden
Right.
he gets Parkinson's. You know what I mean? It's kind of crazy that something like that happens, because like I said, usually it's the other way around. They add the fact that this person's doing, that, and they add that, their disability, or if they're going into especially like, someone like, like now I'm trying to Elliot Page. Yeah, Elliot's Page's character. Obviously when she was transitioning from Ellen Page to Elliot, in
Yeah.
the Academy, they changed her character completely in that storyline to make her character in the TV series to turn from being, transitioning from female to male and stuff like that. Well,
Yeah.
obviously they were doing it because of him doing that. So a lot of times you would think that that's what the script and what the movie was going to do, is because they were doing that. But yeah, to find out that it was like, you know 6 to months to a year before he was actually diagnosed with the not Parkinson's, with dementia. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy how that worked. But yeah, it makes it kind of a bummer, because like I said, especially when you find out, like, that it wasn't beforehand. It wasn't obviously pre-existing, where you were like, okay, they're adding this into it. Where it's like, yeah, it's just a weird coincidence that something like that would happen to a character. And like I said, obviously he's playing a character named Reggie. His real name is Reggie. It's
Yeah.
one of those ones again where we talked about it with, at The Shining. You know what I mean? Jack is playing Jack and Danny's playing Danny. You got
Yeah.
Reggie playing Reggie. You got freaking Mike playing Mike. His brother is Jody, but he's not really the actor's real name is not. So everybody else's name in this movie is not what it is. They're like,
Right.
okay, okay, Reggie and Mike, you guys are just going to use your real names, because obviously you can't, you don't concept a fake name, I guess, or something in your head or something. Don't ask me why they decided to name them after that, but I just think that's kind of funny that, when you have characters that are playing, a character that has their real name.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. And as we get towards the end of this franchise, like the other thing too, when it came to like the culmination of like Oblivion into Ravager, it's also kind of one of those things where I feel, similar to most franchises. Not so much when it comes to real Return of the Living Dead, like we talked about, which really took a nosedive, and then did come back up at least kind of close to the surface, just like I said before. Well, I'm not going to get on my soapbox for this big, drawn out battle over what makes Rave to the Grave a great movie, because it's not. But I could appreciate that, unlike what I felt the cash grab of, Nemesis to um, Resident Evil style was trying to do, I could at least appreciate that while both of those fourth and fifth movies in Return are very low rated, understandably so, at least the fifth one had more of that style of returning to the franchise, where that a little bit of comedic zombie camp that built the franchise, especially in the first two movies, where the third movie is a little bit more horror-ish. Um, at least Rave to the Grave kind of made that attempt to right the ship, to be like, okay, look, this is a campy, fun vampire zombie franchise. That's what we are. let's bring it back to that. Now, that being said, as I bring it back to my kind of final thoughts on this, I feel like Phantasm would have stayed overall very solid had maybe Oblivion just been the end of it. Yes, I do think it would have been a bit, it still would have been a small downturn to it. It wouldn't have been that a strong conclusion, but Phantasm, like we've said multiple times already, so I bring it back to that, it did stay very consistent. You know, if you're looking at the overall movies, depending on personal taste, it stayed probably pretty solidly in a 6 to 7.5, a 6 to 7 kind of range, to where the movies, again, based on personal taste, were relatively solid. I felt like Ravager was just a little bit too weird, a little bit too much of a drop where I almost felt, and maybe that's with Don not being involved. Maybe that has a little something to do with it. But even something down to the what felt to me as this very hilarious but very bizarre horse getting killed by a sphere that seemed like something that they kind of spliced in for whether it wanted a comedic aspect or whether it felt for whatever reason that it was appropriate. And I don't mean appropriate in like the negative nowadays terms. I just mean it as like whether they felt that it made sense, where me not so much. I was kind of like, well, that's hilarious, but I guess, kind of that old way, thing that we've talked about before, where you kind of look at something and you're kind of like, I guess, okay. It kind of had that feel to it. But yeah, I mean, I don't personally hate Ravager. I don't think it's particularly a bad movie per se. I just when it does come to the franchise, I'll be honest, I mean, I could do without it as far as the franchise of Phantasm goes. It fits enough, but I don't really think it's necessary.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like I said, I guess, I mean, it's a nice, like I said, it's almost, I kind of feel like, even though it's not, I kind of feel like Ravager is more like a fan film or
Yeah,
to a point where it's like a love letter to it. And it's like, obviously, we didn't know at the time that, he was as bad as he was, or that we were gonna lose him. But I kind of felt like it was like it'd been a few years between between Oblivion and that were like, okay, we need, Angus is getting older, and his health isn't the greatest. Let's get him back in the tall man suit one more time, kind of thing. It kind of reminds me a little bit, not nearly as much, because we knew that the end was coming more in this side, but it kind of remind me of Sid Haig and Three from Hell. You know what I mean? Even though I know he would, obviously, when Rob wrote Three from Hell to be, he wrote it to be with Sid being
yeah, there's no way
healthy.
that
And
Sid
I,
couldn't
you
be
know,
there.
and then all of a sudden, with Sid's health going bad, obviously he had to rewrite it and make it more. That's why he, did the, having him die in the, in the prison and things like that. Where like this one, they didn't really know that we were gonna lose Angus as quick as we did, but he had been, you could tell even in this movie, like he looks really old. He looks like he's, a lot weaker. You know what I mean? Not like I said, not to the extent of the extremeness of like Sid. When you see
Yeah,
Sid in Three from Hell, you can tell that, like, I mean, between that one and I think the only other one that I can think of is just like would be with Tony Todd in the Final Destination movie, where
yeah.
you,
They're
you can
frail.
just tell that they're just so frail. You can tell, like, this is probably the last things we're gonna see them in. You can just
Yeah.
tell, like, when you watch Three from Hell, you can just tell that, like, it was pretty bad, especially for any of us who are, obviously the Fangs and Infernos who have gone to cons. How, like, even as an older guy, he was still, you know, Captain Spaulding, Spruce, and he would, fling one-liners at you. But then that last time we saw him at the last Monster Mania before he passed, you
Yeah.
could just tell, like, even though he was still the nicest guy, the sweetest guy,
Mm.
and you could tell that that was probably going to be the last time. Even we knew
Like
that then. Well,
there's such
we're
a
going to see,
difference, Devil, between my photo with Sid at that last Monster Mania and like your and Mrs. Devil's photo with Sid when you guys did the photo op. Like it's a drastic
Yeah,
difference
yeah,
in just
yeah. So
he.
it's to the point where I feel, yeah, and I feel like that's how this Phantasm kind of is for me, where it's just one of those ones where it's nice to see Angus Scrimm go back into this character again. But then obviously, obviously we lost him, when, I think I can't remember if it was like before the movie came out or while the movie came out or after the movie came out. I don't remember exactly the timeline completely, but obviously, like I said, you could just see it in his performance that it just wasn't that. I mean, not that he was a spring chicken in the '70s when he made the first movie. He was still an older guy then, but you know what I mean. It's just one of those things where it's like it's so weird, and and to talk about like that, it's just something that I was talking to somebody the other day where it's like you know look at someone like Steve Martin, man. He was gray haired in the '80s. He
Yeah.
looked like an old man in the '80s, and yet here it is,
Yeah.
2026, and he's still alive. So it's like Angus Scrimm, even though he was, of age in the first Phantasm movie, he just like, to me almost seemed like from 70 something when they filmed that movie to all the way to Oblivion that he hadn't really aged between all
No.
those years. A little bit, obviously he's got a little bit older, but not too. But then when, like I said, when you see him in Ravager, it's like, yeah, he definitely looks a lot older. You can definitely tell that, you know, like I said, it's not to the extreme of the Sid, but you can
Yeah.
definitely tell that, like, that was probably going to be his last, which it was his last performance. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just one of those points.
I did look it up. It did come out posthumously. So he passed away in January of 2016 and the movie came out in October of that year.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought that he died before the movie actually did come out. Obviously, he
Yeah.
didn't die before the movie, before he filmed the stuff.
Or
But
wrapped.
yeah, yeah, or at least his scenes and stuff like
His
that were at least done. You know what I mean? Where, versus like, we've talked about before where like with Brandon Lee, you know what I mean? Like when he, obviously got, passed from making the Crow movie, there was
yeah.
still a lot of the Crow movie still left to make to the
Yeah.
point where they were
Heath
almost
Ledger as
like,
well.
yeah, they were almost like, yeah, yeah, but I mean, the only good part, not saying good part, the only like blessing for Heath Ledger, at least when he was making that the Dr. Panassus, or I can't ever say that name right.
Yeah.
At least his character was definitely a guy who can change his looks. So it
Hmm.
made it a little bit more easier. That's hence the reason why you have, I think is it
Johnny Depp
it's Ewan McGregor or Jude Law. One of those two played him, plus Colin Farrell played him.
and Johnny Depp as well, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. So it's cool, like for something like that. So it made sense.
Mhm.
Where obviously, with some, when other characters like someone like Brandon Lee with The Crow, what do you do? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got 30% of your movie, 40% of your movie done, and your lead actor dies, and you're like,
Yeah.
well, luckily we filmed a lot of the more of the front stuff. That's the reason why, like when he's obviously we were talking about Crow, but he's running over the rooftops. A lot of stuff is
Yeah.
shot from. You can just tell like
His
parts of the
stunt
movie
double.
where stuff is definitely shot from behind a lot more and things like that. Where it's like I said, it's nice with that. With obviously like I said, with Angus, it's it came to the point where it's like okay, we maybe because of his health, they like I said, they only gave him so much stuff to film. And the same, like I said, same thing with Sid. He knew his health wasn't going to be able to do a full movie. He's not going to be Captain Spaulding throughout the whole entire movie. Let's just give him that. Same thing with Tony Todd. That's why I mean, like I said, I mean. I know we're going on a rant that's going on other stuff, but just still gonna add it anyway. But
No, of
I'm
course.
not. When it comes to Final Destination, the last one, I don't mind the movie.
Yeah.
I feel like it was interesting, it was fun. I like the concept of them going back in time like that. I feel like if you take away the fact that Tony Todd's one of his last films, and the speech that ultimately that the director let him just say words, and he was talking to us fans, where he was just
Mhm.
telling everybody to love everybody. um I really, like I said, I think if that part's so strong that a lot of people put that into consideration in that movie. And don't get me wrong, I don't hate the movie. I just, to me, I never saw it at par with people were like, "Oh my god, this movie is better than the first one." I'm like, "What? You're out of your mind."
No,
You take away
it's not even
the
better than the
sadness of
second.
Tony.
It's not even
I was
better
like,
than the second one.
you take away it came to the point where it's so much with the Dark Knight. I mean, I think a lot. I mean, granted, yes, I love Heath Ledger in the Dark Knight. I was like a lot of other people. I was like, uh, why you're getting this heartthrob kind of like actor to be the Joker, this bad guy. I'm like, nah, fuck it. And then seeing him play in that movie, I was like, oh, I ate my words. I was like,
Yeah.
that's one of the times I was like, hey man, I'll admit I was wrong, dude. Heath Ledger was badass in this movie. I don't give a fuck what anybody says. But I think that movie got more love because of the fact that he had passed. And that's, like I said, I feel like that with but sometimes where I feel like when it comes down to it, I think a lot of people, when it comes to, even when we're talking about Ravager in the fifth one, I think that's where I find it, where yeah, the movie maybe not as great as the other four, but I kind of love it as much as the first one and the second ones and all the movies, just because it's like, you know, for that reason, like yeah, we get to see Angus get to be the tall man. That's the character we love. I mean, I know, obviously he's in, he's been in a bunch of movies. He's been in your subspecies, you know what I mean? But as far as anybody's concerned,
Yeah.
that tall man is him. You know what
Tall
I mean?
man.
That's
Absolutely.
that's exactly and it was nice to kind of see him go back to being able to don that one time, even though, like I said, it wasn't, maybe not the greatest performances and stuff like that. But like I said, it's still nice to see that and stuff like that. So that's why I went in that little tangent for for as far as the
Well,
Tony Todd and the Heath Ledger stuff like that, just because it's like it's not always, it's nice to have that kind of stuff. And like I said, I mean, especially with, like I said, especially with that Tony Todd thing, because it's like, I mean, a lot of actors, you know, pass during movies, or have accidents like we talked about with with The Crow and stuff like that. And there are some actors that knew they were dying and still filmed. I mean, it's crazy to think about. The what's his name? Now I can't think of his name, Chad. But the hell is this for? But he played the Black Panther. To find out that he was like
oh
going
yeah.
through like stage four
Chad
cancer.
Boseman.
Yeah, Ghostman or something like that. But going through like stage four cancer while
Yeah.
still filming this movie is insane. You know what I mean? But there are times where you have actors and stuff like that in movies where they know that, that's going to be the last time they're probably going to be on film, because they just know that maybe they got some terminal news or something like that. But it's really, like I said, when it comes to that Final Destination, that's the one thing that I will praise that movie for and that director for, is that you very rarely ever get someone to be like, here, talk to the camera and talk to the people. You very rarely get that, where it's like, where you get that kind of message, and it's not really, as far as a script, it's not anything in the movie where you would be talking like he normally does as his character, in the Final Destination movies. I just felt like it's like, here, we know that you don't have much time longer. This might be the last film that you make. This might be the last time anybody has anything on film. Tell the people what they want. Oh, and like I said, it's great to you get those things like that. And I wish, like I said, when we talk about meeting, trying to meet Angus Grimm and things like that, or even like going to Sin and stuff like that. It's one of those ones where it's like, yeah, that's the one thing that we try to talk a lot about of this is, if you're a fan of stuff, regardless, man, go and try to. I mean, even I mean, it's tough when you're going to get big people. If you're a huge fan of Robert England, or like Norman Reedus, or even somebody who's even still young, but Matthew Lillard. If you're a fan of him, God forbidding, like, I'm not saying that I want anything to happen to him, but let's just say something did happen. You know what I mean? I get it, because with those people, it's really, really tough. But if you have somebody that you like that is like an Angus Scrim, or somebody that doesn't have that monster huge line, go and talk to him. Just say hi to him, because you never know if you're going to get that chance. And that's kind of the one thing that I may have that buyer's regret, but my biggest regret with Angus Grimm is at least not going over and saying hi to him. I wish I
Same.
would at least had that conversation with him. As much as I wish that I would have gotten something signed or had that, I kind of wish I would at least had that interaction where it's like, hey, I at least got to say hi to this guy, or at least I've got to like tell him how much I loved Phantasm, or tell him how much I love his characters and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely go. Like I said, that's the one thing I implore to everybody is to go out and like, yeah, not you don't necessarily, when it comes to these cons, you don't always have to. Like I said, the big names, it's kind of frowned upon to go onto those lines and wait hours and hours and then not spend any money, because sometimes some of the people are going to be like, yeah, like their agents are going to be like, dude, no, you're now you're holding up lines to say something. But like with the smaller name people, if
Yeah.
they've got nobody at their table right now, I mean, there's times where we've gone to where Tom Savini had like nobody in line and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Tom Savini's one person that you're like, just go up and say, hey man, I'm a huge fan of yours, man. I love, you know, I told George Romero that your remake was better than his original movie. Just tell him stupid shit like that. You know what I mean? He'd be
Yeah.
like, what? You're an idiot for telling him that. But anyway, but yeah,
George agreed.
yeah, George agreed. But anyway, yeah, that's what I always tell everybody when it comes to that kind of stuff.
No, absolutely. And it is also that kind of thing. Like, do I think that, like, going back to Heath Ledger for just a moment, do I think that his portrayal of that Joker character was absolutely worth the Oscar, acknowledgement? Oh, hell yeah. Had he stayed alive, based on what I see with the way the Oscars tend to do things, do I think he necessarily gets that love, maybe even gets that win that he did? I don't know. I don't necessarily know if I see it that way. But again,
Yeah,
that's definitely one of the reasons why you definitely want to take the opportunity to meet people whenever you can. So, Devil, as we circle it towards the end here, when it comes to this is like we talked about, to circle it back around to the beginning of our conversations to refresh the Fangs and Infernos that have been hanging out with us. This is a brand new segment that is all about you guys. So, the franchise is going to ultimately be decided by you, Fangs and Infernos. But so keep an eye out for the Devil's Poll when he posts that for you guys to make your decisions on which franchise. Keep in mind, franchise that you think is better between Return of the Living Dead and Phantasm. We understand that we might personally have specific movies that are ride or dies for us. But when it comes to me and Devil, imploring you guys, keep in mind that it's ultimately about franchise as a whole. So keep that in mind when you guys place your votes on the Devil's Poll. Now, that being said, Devil, before we let everybody go about their merry way, ultimately, I do think when it comes to franchise, Phantasm does have ultimately that consistent factor to it. I do think there's so much strength in Return of the Living Dead. It's one of the things that drew me so fondly to that franchise is that camp, that fun, those specific but also secondary characters. You've got the tall man and you've got Reggie consistently. You've got Rocky returning for two movies. You've got Michael returning for two movies. And while you don't get any returns in Return of the Living Dead, with the exception of Tom playing a different character in the second one, as main characters, I mean, you there's so much strength in that first movie, strength in the second movie, and also very strong, appeal, we'll call it, with the third movie. Um, when it also comes to Phantasm, like Return, has that appeal, that strength in characters, but it does have a consistent factor to it that does probably overall make it a stronger franchise per se, but you never really know what's going to make a franchise ultimately beloved by a horror fan.
Yeah, for sure. You know what I mean? That's what I said. I mean, like I said, I mean, to me, like I said, if I had to go with, Return of the Living Dead, obviously that one, two, and if it was one, two, and three of Return of the Living Dead, and then one, two, or three of Phantasm, I would probably say, yeah, give it to Return of the Living Dead and stuff like that. Then, like I said, obviously the drop of four and five on Return, and even though four and five is maybe not the greatest as far as Phantasm, it still had that consistency where you want to do.
Yes.
So, like I said, to me overall, I think. In my opinion, like I said, we're gonna let the Fangs and Infernos talk about it. And like I said again, we're imploring that when you vote for this, it's about the franchise in a whole, not one or two of the sums. It's the whole, franchise. I feel like Phantasm to me, I like the Phantasm series better than the Return of the Living Dead series as a whole. But obviously, like I said, to me, those first three returns versus the first three Phantasms, which I love all three of the Phantasms.
Yeah,
But like I
absolutely.
said, but I feel like if I had to choose between just those three, yeah, I would definitely go with Return. And like I said, like I said, my main reason mainly is just because of the drop offs and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it should be interesting. But like I said, it's one of those ones where, yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like the needle's probably going to swing more Return just because so many people love that, at
Yeah.
least love that first one, whether or not you like the second one or not, whether or not you like the third one. Obviously, most people, there's got to be somebody out there. Some people may think that four and five are the best Return of the Living Dead. You're obviously wrong, but
They're
that's
wrong.
But anyway, hey, you're allowed to have your opinion, and
Yep.
and you can have it. Doesn't mean we're gonna agree or like it, but you can have it. But like I said, I feel like, when it comes to that, we go that. But then again, you never really know. You know what I mean? I mean, as of this recording, we've already put the poll out
Yep.
for the who do you think is better, the
The
that
hotter
we were
vixen.
talking about, the hotness versus trash versus Julie. And surprisingly, as of right now, at least of this recording, that Julie's whomping the shit out of trash.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey man, that was something I wasn't completely didn't figure. I figured, I
I didn't think
figured
it was going to be so lopsided.
yeah, exactly. So, it is what it is, and we'll figure it out. So, look forward to that and seeing what the Fangs and Infernos want to do when it comes to franchises return and Living Dead versus Phantasm.
Absolutely, they're my friend for sure. And of course, Devil and I always want to give our appreciation and a little plug to our beloved partners and sponsors here. So, of course, make sure that you guys are getting out and supporting Mark and Lizzie at rockandhorror.com. They are also our merch store. Go to the Vampire and Devil collab category, and you'll see all of what we offer when it comes to merch for this podcast. But also keep in mind that they do such amazing stuff in the store for themselves. Great shirts, hoodies, shorts, tanks, all that great stuff, as well as other unique knickknacks. They've done things like cutting boards, they've done things like coffee mugs, they've done things like, kitchen towels. So a lot of cool things to check out when it comes to everything that Mark and Lizzie do. But also make sure that you're following them on their socials, just like you follow us on ours, because whenever they run deals, those deals do apply in our merch store. So keep that in mind there, Fangs and Infernos. And of course, John with the Salem Witchboard Museum, as well as the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore, our friends at Brutalities, Chris and Saren with Twisted Vines, and of course our buddy Chris also with the Buffalo Bill House. It's now an amazing Airbnb, an amazing experience, and it's also making its way into pop culture as well outside of Silence of the Lambs. Really, really cool things involving a franchise called The Barn. So make sure you guys are keeping an eye on that, and definitely make sure you guys are checking those movies out. So that's the way it's going to be. Again, keep an eye out for the Devil's Poll when this episode gets posted. You will see your fatality as well. But as of right now, we are leaving it up to you, Fangs and Infernos, on who gets the win in franchises. Is it Return of the Living Dead? Is it Phantasm? You will tell us. Horns up. Fangs out. Ghouls and Fangs. Vampire and the Devil here. We got a little question for you. Devil, there's kind of a triangle, a three-headed monster per se when it comes to Baltimore that I don't think people necessarily realize. We've got Edgar Allan Poe, we've got John Waters, but what else do we have?
We got the Ouija boards, oh yeah.
Absolutely. Starting in Baltimore way back in the day, a lot of people are unfamiliar with William Fuld and Elijah Bond, who patented, and the birth of the Ouija board was right here in Baltimore. Devil and vampire coming at you from the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore, courtesy of our friend John Kozik, who invited us out to check it out and shoot a little conversation action to let you guys all know. Of course, you've seen on our socials that we have partnered with both museums, and we couldn't be more appreciative to John for that opportunity. So whenever you're here in Baltimore, of course, right attached to the Bazaar Oddity Shop off of the Avenue, you have Witchboard Museum Baltimore. And when you're in Witch City, USA, up in Salem, Massachusetts, that's when you get to visit the Salem Witchboard Museum.
Oh yeah, if you want to see some cool stuff, see some cool boards, get some cool history, go see our boy John. Man, that guy is really awesome, man. That dude knows his boards, he knows his history, he's about preserving the society of witch boards and the talking boards and all that goodness. And you know, we love it. We love the fact that, you know, they were gonna bring in this museum here in Baltimore, so all the Baltimore fans or all your East Coast fans that are maybe not as far away, going up to Salem, come out to Baltimore and check it out, you know what I mean? Because there's some cool stuff in this museum, and you gotta check it out, because the devil and the vampire said so.
That is facts right there, my friend. Again, absolutely attached to the Bazaar Oddities shop in the Avenue in Hamden for the Baltimore established Witchboard Museum, or off of Essex Street in Salem, Massachusetts for the Salem Witchboard Museum. Horns up, fangs out.